This pathetic protagonist reeked of cheap liquor and unwashed armpits. Yet his disgusting state had a clear cause, a devastating tragedy that had destroyed his life. It wasn't something as ordinary as running out of hot shower water. He would eventually get his life back on track, of course. But hold your horses for a moment, my friend. His parents had passed away to a better place. A criminal organization and the infamous Trukuin were responsible. This drunkard, however, was no ordinary man. He was an awakened with brutal, overwhelming powers. 5 years of mercenary work in foreign lands lay behind him. That experience had stripped away part of his humanity. So when he finally returned home, he discovered that his parents had been buried by a criminal organization of other awakened. Something about the whole situation didn't smell right. Our protagonist's name was Ken. He planned to use every bit of his military knowledge. He would also use the powers he had inherited from the gods. His goal was to wipe out everyone and everything connected to this nightmare. He intended to infiltrate the organization and eliminate its members one by one. Gender would make no difference to him. "Good night, girl. I'll see you tomorrow." A phone suddenly rings. A young woman hurries out of the building while slipping on her shoes. Her press badge reveals her to be Oha Miyahara, a reporter. As she rushes outside, she still has to buy her ticket. Her bus is already waiting at the Tokyo bus terminal. All tickets for the morning and early afternoon departures have sold out. Luckily, the young woman managed to secure the very last ticket available for her destination, and it came with a surprisingly comfortable seat. The journalist turns her head to the side with a trace of disgust. Next to her sits a man who looks homeless. She silently regrets that of all the seats on this bus, she ended up right here. Annoyed, she tries to figure out what this guy's problem is. The constant smell of alcohol rises from the man beside her. To make it worse, his clothes are filthy enough that he's probably dirtying the seat. Judging by how deeply he's sleeping, the man must have spent the entire night drinking. The reporter even covers her nose because of the stench coming from him. Oha pulls her earbuds from her bag and starts playing music, hoping to ignore the unpleasant presence next to her. The man keeps sleeping without a care. Oha begins to feel drowsy herself. Her day has been terrible since the moment she woke up. Before long, she drifts off while listening to music. She had no idea things could still get much worse. Oha suddenly wakes from deep sleep as she's violently thrown forward. One of her earbuds flies out and hits the floor while screams erupt around her. The woman struggles to understand what's happening. She had heard a loud crash right as she woke up. Terrified, Oha wonders what the hell is going on. People lie slumped around her. The bus windows are shattered and the curtains are splattered with ketchup. The scene in front of her is pure chaos. The bus lies wrecked and the floor is covered in red. The driver slammed his head into the steering wheel and lost consciousness. From outside, it became clear that the bus had crashed on a mountain curve and was now dangling off the edge of a cliff. Oha fought desperately to unbuckle the seatbelt across her waist. The belt finally came loose, but the bus, barely holding on, began to shift. The ground under the vehicle gave way, and the bus dropped straight down. The reporter found herself in freefall. Her face was filled with pure desperation. She screamed, hands reaching out but finding nothing to hold on to. The young woman thought this might really be the end when a hand suddenly appeared to save her. Before she could fall any farther, the hand caught her by the belt. Surprised, Oha looked up at whoever had grabbed her. It was the homeless man, Ken. One hand gripped the bus while the other held the woman tightly by her belt, which seemed to be made of leather. His long, messy hair hid most of his face, except for a cold, piercing stare. Oha was in complete shock from everything that had happened. Trembling, the journalist finally recognized the homeless man. She grabbed onto Ken's forearm, which was much thicker than both of her hands combined. Still shaken, Oha thanked the protagonist for saving her life. With no time to reply, the homeless Ken noticed that the bus was in even greater danger. He spotted a broken window nearby. He acted quickly and threw the woman, who was still in the middle of thanking him, out through the window. She was stunned as she went flying through the air. While Ken fell with the bus, the woman was thrown in the opposite direction. Oha hit the grass hard on her back. She complained that the homeless guy had thrown her out without any warning. But at that moment, the falling bus exploded, making the reporter let out a small scream. Still, arms lifted to shield her face, the reporter stares at the destruction unfolding in front of her. Oha grows worried when she remembers there were still people trapped inside the bus. The vehicle keeps rolling and bouncing down the slope. All the journalist can do is watch in stunned disbelief. Now free of anything holding it back, the bus drops straight toward the water below. At first, the sea swallows the bus whole, but soon the front of the vehicle breaks through the surface again. Among the water and rocks, a small section of the bus remains visible. Up on the mountain road above, a crowd has already gathered, always drawn to disasters like this. The crash that forced the bus off the cliff was violent enough to involve more than 10 cars and block both lanes. The girl is left completely stranded on a rock. Her jaw drops the moment she realizes something. something. The man who saved her was the same homeless passenger who had been sitting beside her on the bus. Remembering this, the reporter mourns all the lives that were lost. She leans against the rock for a moment, trying to steady herself and calm down. But a scream suddenly pulls her out of her thoughts. Kids standing at the top, watching the tragedy, shout that there are survivors. In disbelief, Oha moves closer to the edge to see for herself. Someone is climbing out through the bus windshield. The protagonist emerges, carrying another person on his back. Oha can hardly believe what she is seeing. Ken plants one knee for support and manages to pull himself almost completely out of the wrecked bus. The sight sparks an idea in the reporter's mind. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out her phone, and she decides to live stream the disaster. With one tap, she goes live and begins an emergency broadcast in real time. Viewers from her wide audience start tuning in. Oha tells the audience about the accident. Because she is streaming straight from her show's official channel, the number of viewers quickly grows. The journalist shows the current state of the bus in the water. While aiming the camera at the vehicle, she gives details about the journey. A head appears once again from the broken windshield. Filming live as Ken rescues people, she calls him a hero. The protagonist rises from the floating bus once more. The kids watch him move with wild energy. The chat fills up instantly with comments. On the stream, the hero is seen bringing out 5 people as if he were simply taking them for a walk. However, his face shows no emotion at all. Ken notices a rock near the bus and jumps toward it while carrying everyone. Oha keeps the camera rolling without a break when a notification pops up. Her boss demands to know what this emergency broadcast is about. She continues filming while he keeps messaging her, asking where she is, completely ignoring her boss, who insists this is not the time to broadcast an accident. The journalist keeps the stream going. Oha pulls a tablet from her bag that somehow still works perfectly, without even a scratch. She messages her boss back, saying she has no time to stop filming and will explain everything later. The rest of the newsroom staff grow frustrated, arguing among themselves about what to do as everyone scrambles. In the background, a sound technician turns up the volume on Oha's live feed, and the broadcast continues uninterrupted. Screams from the watching children make the reporter flinch. Oha quickly grabs the phone from the rock to keep the stream going. The side of the bus becomes visible in the water. The vehicle spins in the current like a crocodile as it drifts toward 2 large rocks. Ken watches the bus being carried away. One of the rescued women is being held by 2 people because she is too distraught to stand on her own. The woman screams inconsolably that her son is still on the bus, insisting that saving her means nothing if her son isn't saved too. The bus disappears completely beneath the water. For a moment, Ken evaluates the situation. The hero looks out at the water as if weighing his options. Then he runs straight toward the edge. Ken dives headfirst into the waves. Only now does the reporter realize that this hero is the same man who saved her earlier. Ken swims toward the sunken bus. Underwater, the protagonist opens his eyes. He activates his powers, and his eyes begin to glow. A faint blue light spreads through the interior of the bus. Using his enhanced vision, Ken searches for the boy and soon spots the unconscious child pinned under wreckage inside the bus. Ken swims directly toward the child. He grabs one of the metal bars trapping the boy. With his powers, the hero lifts the wreckage off the child. Ken pulls the boy free from the wreckage. Holding the child in his arms, the hero looks down at the unconscious boy. Now carrying the child, the protagonist swims out of the sinking bus. However, the vehicle continues to descend, making the situation even more dangerous. Ken feels the water shifting around him and glances around. The hero understands that both he and the boy are now in serious danger. Activating his powers, the protagonist creates a shield around the child just as debris crashes toward the sinking bus. Outside, the reporter watches the situation with growing concern. She keeps filming with her phone, wondering if Ken is still trapped inside the bus. Bright yellow glow suddenly appears beneath the waves. Everyone on the shore is shocked when a massive explosion erupts in the water, sending pieces of the bus flying everywhere. The child's mother watches in despair. Tears fill her eyes as she believes her son is still trapped inside the bus. A man holds the mother back as she tries to jump into the water after her son, pleading for them to let her go. Against everyone's expectations, a hand breaks through the surface of the water. The hero's hand grips a rock tightly. In one swift motion, Ken pulls himself out of the water with the child still in his arms. The woman is stunned and overwhelmed with relief that her son has been rescued. The mother embraces the boy, who miraculously opens one eye. The protagonist watches their reunion with a completely emotionless expression. Thousands of people are watching the scene through the emergency broadcast. The chat explodes with reactions to the mysterious man's heroic actions. Finally, the fire department arrives along with other first responders. Everyone who saw the events either in person or through the broadcast now regards Ken as a true hero. Rays of sunlight begin to break through the rain-heavy clouds. News outlets speculate speculate that the 12-vehicle crash was orchestrated by organized crime. The death toll from the accident reached 200 people. The public began showing interest in the incident without fully grasping how massive it actually was. The story made Tokyo's morning news, raising questions about public safety. Yet several reports continued to focus on the new public hero. Society's attention had turned to the mysterious man who rescued passengers from the bus that plunged off the coastal road. Several days later, inside an office building, an employee was being scolded. Inside the studio, the boss's lecture continued. Oi listened patiently as her superior criticized how reckless the emergency broadcast had been. The girl was surprised by how worried her colleagues had been about her. Her boss explained that everyone had been extremely anxious because she had been caught in the middle of the accident. Aoi felt moved when her superior said that everything was fine now that she was safe. Still, the journalist couldn't avoid having to write a formal apology letter. Just as Aoi was about to leave, her boss made it clear that she had only escaped with a letter because the broadcast had been a massive success. After being sent back to work, the reporter started wondering if the mysterious hero was all right. She had even asked the paramedics about him, but he had disappeared without a trace. Determined to thank the man who saved her, Aoi decided to cover stories about Tokyo's anonymous hero. That was when she got the idea to try securing an interview with her savior. Elsewhere, the hero was occupied with other matters. Ken was on a call with a man named Herms. Herms answered the phone, saying he hadn't expected a call from the people's hero. The protagonist immediately cut him off and told him to drop the nicknames. Herms asked if he could call him Hiro Ken Minajimoto instead. Running out of patience, Ken replied that he hadn't called to make small talk. The man on the other end laughed and said he was only joking, then asked what the hero actually needed. Ken told him he was looking for someone. Another ordinary day begins in the bustling city of Tokyo. Posters have been put up on walls calling for information about the mysterious people's hero. One of the papers taped to a wall shows a photo of the protagonist rescuing passengers from the crash bus. Inside the broadcasting station, complete chaos has taken over. Countless prank calls flood the staff phones with people falsely claiming to be the hero. Sitting at her desk, Oi regrets ever starting the search for the mysterious man. The journalist thinks about how many fake stories are spreading online. All over social media, people are cosplaying and pretending to be the people's hero. Everything shifts when a small number suddenly appears on her screen. A notification grabs Oi's attention. It's a message from one of her older colleagues. The woman quickly tells her coworkers she needs to step out for a while, grabs her bag, and hurries out of the office. Her colleagues wonder where she's rushing off to when everyone is so busy. One of them tries to call after her, but she's already gone, and doesn't notice what's displayed on her monitor screen. White car drives through the city. The vehicle speeds along an empty road. Inside the car, Oi is on a phone call. She confirms she's the person who received the earlier message and keeps driving out of the city. A sign ahead points to the cemetery just to the right. The vehicle is now parked. On the phone screen, the photo shows the much sought-after hero sitting beside a gravestone surrounded by several sake bottles. The man who took the photo introduces himself as Takaru Akiyama. Takaru explains that a few months ago he was at the cemetery when a man in strange clothes appeared next to one of the graves. The journalist learns that after making an offering, the man bought a large amount of alcohol. Oi heads straight to the gravestone where the hero was reportedly seen. The woman examines the area carefully. While checking information on her phone, the reporter recalls that the informant mentioned the grave had been made in June. Oi remembers the strong smell of alcohol coming from the man who sat beside her on the bus, along with the mud on his pants and shoes. The journalist feels a pang of regret as she realizes the person next to her hadn't been a vagrant, but a young man in mourning. Turning to Takaru, she asks if he knows whose grave it is. Determined to find the protagonist, Oi also asks who is responsible for maintaining the family grave. Even on television, the anchor continues announcing the search for the people's hero. The vibrant city is covered in ads and posters looking for the mysterious man. Despite all the publicity, Ken walks through the streets unnoticed, now dressed in ordinary clothes. With a fresh haircut and his beard shaved off, the protagonist has regained his youthful appearance. He worries that those searching for him might have noticed his powers. The young man thinks about how much he wants to take down organized crime, but knows his body isn't in peak condition. Ken had deliberately set a trap to lure the criminals out. The protagonist decided this approach would be safer for him. After extensive investigation, the young man discovered that the criminal organization had a very wealthy sponsor. With a specific target in mind, Ken crafted the perfect excuse to draw that criminal's attention. The young man had one clear goal in trying to attract the criminal's notice. If the criminals came after him, he might finally get clues about Minajimoto's whereabouts. Ken walks casually through a familiar area. A sudden cry for help makes the protagonist stop in his tracks. The hero looks around frantically. Then he freezes freezes, staring intently into the distance. Satisfied, Ken mutters to himself, quietly thanking whoever led him here. On a dark street, several shady men in suits have gathered. The men are loitering near the tunnel exit, some smoking while others chat among themselves. A little farther away, a group of teenagers is hanging around a sports car. One of the boys asks how last night's party went. Another replies that he sold the girl because he got bored of her. Needles and small suspicious bags are scattered on the ground. Some of the guys look completely drained from partying too hard. In the back seat of one of the nearby cars, a girl is lying down. The girl wakes up and overhears the conversation happening outside. A sharp-faced teen tells her that they always have plenty of fun with girls like her. The boy grabs her face and holds a vape close, saying it's expensive and won't come for free. The girl closes her eyes in fear. Before he can force the vape on her, the thug is startled by one of his friends shouting. The kid with the vape looks around to see what's happening. A guy with his hands in his pockets is walking straight toward the group of criminals. Our protagonist Ken calmly scans the thugs around him. The criminals look at the young man with complete confidence, as if he's lost his mind. From a distance, the teenager is still gripping the girl's face while watching the confrontation. Ken smiles at the men and casually calls them trash. The protagonist walks closer and tells the scumbags that they're nothing but piles of filth who can't control their own urges. Facing one of the furious thugs head-on, the hero declares that everyone there is just a bunch of cowards. The already angry thug becomes even more enraged. He swings and punches Ken in the face with full force. Determined to teach the young man a lesson, the thug keeps throwing punch after punch. Some of the watching criminals laugh at the sight of the kid getting beaten. Since Ken isn't fighting back, the attacker mocks him and asks where all that tough talk from earlier went. Completely unharmed, the hero suddenly grabs the man's fist in midair. The young man tightens his grip around the thug's hand. The criminal screams in agony as if his hand is being crushed. The other criminals around them grow visibly agitated. Another thug tries to attack Ken from behind. The protagonist quickly shifts his stance and delivers a powerful kick straight to the second guy's groin. The thug collapses instantly, paralyzed by the pain. The force of the kick sends him flying backward, slamming into the wall like a rag doll. The guy is already unconscious. Ken calmly looks around to see who's next. Since no one moves, he calmly walks toward the group he just dismantled. Confident, the protagonist tells the thugs that he's only defending himself because they attacked him first. Getting no response, the hero asks again whether they understand that they started this fight. The thugs grow furious at the young man's audacity. As a group, the cowards charge straight at him. Ken, however, looks excited by their initiative. This was exactly what he had been hoping for. The first thug rushes in fast, swinging a punch. Ken easily dodges and lets the man stumble past him. The young man grabs the thug's head before he can recover and slams it hard into the ground. A second criminal comes at him from behind with a small knife. With almost no effort, the young man dodges the attack. Everything happens extremely fast. Ken slaps the guy across the face and sends him flying backward. The thug shoots across the ground like a bowling ball and knocks down several of his own men in the process. The rowdy teenagers nearby start realizing something strange is happening. A clear commotion is visible across the dark street. One of the boys turns to a shadowy figure nearby and tells him to handle the situation. The deformed, devilish-looking man says he's on. The devil walks forward, assuming whoever is causing the chaos must be strong. But when he arrives at the scene, he is completely shocked. At the mysterious young man's feet lies the last fallen thug. Ken casually dusts off his clothes while the rest of the criminals lie sprawled on the ground. The devil calls out to the protagonist and demands to know who the hell he is. Without even turning around, the young man replies that he's just a passerby. Facing the newly arrived thug, Ken remarks that the party was too loud, so they came over to check what was happening. Walking toward the protagonist, the devil tells him to stop acting so cocky. The thug charges straight at the young man at full speed. Once again, Ken simply dodges the incoming punch. The hero counters with a powerful kick to the man's ribs that makes him double over. Before the devil can fly backward, Ken reaches out and grabs him by the head, holding him up. Completely pissed off, Ken prepares his finishing move. He punches the guy in the face so hard that he flies farther than Team Rocket. The devil crashes back first into the wall right where the teens are standing, leaving them speechless as they wonder clear who this guy is. Still, watching the scene, the boys see the thug's body slump lifelessly to the ground. Still in shock, the rich kids finally start to react. One of them picks up an empty bottle from the party remains. The group of teenagers charges at the stranger together. Calm and collected, the young man stands still, waiting for the approaching enemies. Once Ken sees they're close enough, he delivers an uppercut to the first guy's chin, follows with a slap across the second one's face, kicks the third in the ear, and finishes with a solid smack to the fourth. The young man pauses to check if anyone is getting back up. Nothing. Behind the protagonist, strong headlights suddenly flash on, catching him off guard. When the hero turns to look, a car is speeding straight toward him. At the wheel is the vape kid. The terrified teenager slams his foot on the accelerator. Our young man doesn't seem bothered and simply stays standing in front of the car. At high speed, the vehicle rushes straight toward the protagonist. Ken looks at the approaching car as if it were nothing more than a scooter. The young man stops the car with a single foot, crushing the front end and creating a deep dent. The vape kid smashes face first into the windshield. With his eyes glowing, the protagonist looks genuinely excited. He has finally found his target. Ken charges straight at the driver. He thrusts his hand into the car, grabs the kid by the collar, and yanks him out of the vehicle, smashing through whatever is in the way. The kid flies through the air and crashes into the ground. Shaking like a frightened puppy, the thug looks up at the young man walking toward him. The vape kid starts apologizing without even knowing what for. Smiling darkly, Ken approaches his target and tells him not to worry. With an empty, soulless stare, the protagonist informs the little thug that he isn't going to die. The girl who refused the vape wakes up startled. Above her, there is no ceiling, only the open sky and a few metal beams. The victim quickly gets up once she recognizes where she is. A hooded figure nearby asks if she's finally awake. The girl asks the guy with his back turned who he is. The young man tells her to stay quiet and remain where she is, because he's almost finished with what he's doing. Then he turns to Yosuke, the trembling kid, and asks if he agrees with him. Ken tells Yosuke to hand over his phone, and the kid nervously nods and gives it to him. The protagonist confirms with the thug whether his name is Yosuke Mita. The boy immediately confirms it. Wanting to dig deeper, the young man asks the kid what his father does for a living. Yosuke says his father is a member of parliament, and Ken notes that everything so far matches his investigation. The young man kneels beside the rich kid and asks if his dad knows he's a thug. There is no answer. On the phone screen, a call is being made to the kid's father. The parliament member answers, asking his son where he's been and if he knows what time it is. Our hero, with the phone to his ear, listens to the full scolding the father gives the kid. Ken speaks up and addresses the man on the other end of the line, who sounds confused. The protagonist continues and asks the father if he knows what crimes his son has been involved in. Ken starts listing the offenses Yosuke is connected to, telling the man that since his son was caught red-handed, he's looking at a minimum of 10 years in prison. He also mentions that there is camera evidence from all the luxury cars around. The confused man asks if Ken is with the police. The protagonist replies that he's just a passerby, but that the son and his friends put him through terrible things. Showing the phone to Yosuke, our guy smiles and says he wants compensation, since the thugs were the ones who started everything. On the other end, the kid's father asks if that's true. Defeated, the playboy simply apologizes to his dad. To make things worse, Ken tells the man that there is also footage of Yosuke trying to run him over while drunk, and both the dealer and the victim can serve as witnesses. The parliamentarian asks how much money he wants. Our guy says he wants about 4 million reals and a written promise not to harm the victim. The father loses it and asks if he's joking. The protagonist replies by asking if the man wants him to start a live stream of what's happening right now. After a moment of silence, the parliamentarian starts bargaining and offers 2 million instead. Ken asks him to pick a title for the live stream. Desperate, Yosuke's father threatens the young man, saying he won't get away with this and that they should settle things peacefully. Ken makes it clear that he knows with the politician status, he could manipulate the media and erase the videos, so this is the fastest way to resolve everything. The old man complains that his son only brings him trouble. The protagonist tells him to stop whining and give an answer already. Defeated, the politician agrees to the compensation terms, offering to pay in an untraceable way and promising to leave the victim alone. Ken responds enthusiastically, saying they finally have a deal, and gives the old man an address to meet him at 6 in the morning. Quickly, the young man throws Yosuke's phone back onto the ground. The hero finally turns to the girl and apologizes for making her wait. Ken tells the victim that he understands she probably wants to go home, but if she leaves now, she'll be haunted by nightmares for the rest of her life. Then the young man explains that the only way to truly get rid of fear is to eliminate the source of the problem. Sometime later, the sun rises as men step out of the silver car. Our hero believes that problems should be dealt with the same day, so that peace can exist in the mind tomorrow. Ken receives the money bag and opens it to check what's inside. The bag bag is stuffed with thick stacks of cash. The young man tosses the money bag to the girl. The girl stares at the bag in complete shock, unable to believe what's happening. She thanks the hero, who asks how she ended up in that situation and tells her there's no need to thank him. When the girl starts to protest, he tells her that he didn't help out of goodwill. Either way, the victim says that to her, he's a savior. The protagonist replies that he's not a hero. He's just a delinquent passing through. Elsewhere, a man slams his fist on a table in rage. Blinded by hatred, Yosuke's father swears he won't let this slide, since the man who blackmailed him could destroy his political career. The old man makes a call to Yugo Mizukami, the person responsible for the downfall of the protagonist's adoptive father. Relaxing on a couch, the criminal answers the call and refers to the parliamentarian as professor. On the other end of the line, the politician tells Yugo that he needs someone taken care of no matter what, and that the reward will be 2 million reals in cash. The mobster replies that he'd like to hear more about this story. Smiling, Yugo receives the politician's orders. A news report recounts the June incident in which a lone man saved multiple people from a fallen bus. A man watching the video on a tablet seems to recognize the mysterious hero and asks if it's really him. A nervous woman bites her nails and says that judging by the face and movements, it can only be him. With a dark expression, another woman adds that more than anything, she remembers his aura. It's completely unique. Another man slams the table in anger. He thought the hero had died in the war like Yasha. In the dark room, the shady individuals wonder how he managed to survive. A red-eyed woman says there's no point in panicking now, reminding them that the reason for the meeting is to discuss the next steps. The man on the other side of the table says it's useless to dwell on this development. They'll have to deal with it themselves. The red-eyed woman calls the group to attention. She asks a man in a light-colored suit behind her why he's still on the phone. Finishing the call, the man says he sent a goon to the congressman's house. Yugo Mizukami adds that apparently the old man's son got involved with some delinquents. Someone at the table asks since when the Seven Stars Society deals with kids, but they are quickly cut off. Back on topic, the blue-eyed man asks what the others think Ken will do next. A guy with a yellow tie says he has no idea, given his personality. The guy might just show up at the Seven Stars headquarters any second. The girl, still biting her nails, says he's not foolish enough to do something that reckless. She explains that the protagonist is likely gathering extremely powerful allies. Her finger is bleeding from how hard she's been biting her nails. As the new day begins, a woman rings the bell at the wide gate of a residence. From inside the house, a man begins to open the door. As Ken Miyamoto appears from behind the gate, the woman says with determination that she finally managed to find him. The young man stares at the reporter, unsure of what to say. Ken asks the woman how she found this place, and she replies that she had been there several times but could never locate him. Looking all cool, our guy leans against the wall and asks what she wants, making it clear he's not interested in an interview. He quickly backs down and tells him that's not why she came. Then the reporter begins to explain. She looks into his eyes and says she genuinely just wanted to say thank you. After a moment of silence, Ken remains surprised while Aoi looks embarrassed. The journalist asks to borrow the hero's phone, already snatching it from his hand. Poking around the device, the girl asks why he saved her and didn't leave any way for her to contact him, as if that made any sense. Aoi stops when she notices something peculiar on the phone. Ken's phone divides people into 3 categories: those he calls, those who call him, and those he can ignore. The journalist examines his peculiar way of organizing contacts. Shamelessly, the woman adds her number to the 3rd group. Then Aoi looks at him and asks what the difference is between the group he calls and the one he answers. Taking the phone back, Ken replies that the difference is whether he made the call or not. The woman asks if that means the people he calls are important to him. The young man looks at her without answering. The reporter follows up, assuming that means the people who call him aren't important. A bit awkward, Ken says that's not quite right. Then he explains that the 2nd group is actually made up of people he can't afford to ignore. Aoi asks if she should change the group she put her number in, and the guy says it's fine as it is. Teasing her, he says it would be a big mistake to ignore a call from someone who stopped everything they were doing just to visit him. The journalist blushes a little, appreciating Ken's smile. Then she smiles herself and offers to buy him a coffee as thanks. Sometime later, they're sitting across from each other in a cafe. Aoi seems to be genuinely enjoying the conversation. A man watches the two from a car window. Seeing Ken in a good mood, the stalker concludes that the world is indeed a wonderful place. The reason is that he has recognized the young man sitting there as the people's hero. With contempt, the man in the car mutters that even a delinquent like him can flirt with a girl in a cafe. Ken walks the journalist to her taxi. Aoi says goodbye and tells him she'll get in touch again. As the car drives off, she celebrates the fact that she managed to thank him, buy him coffee, and even go for a walk. For a moment, the young woman pauses and reflects. Realizing she practically had a date with the guy, she smacks her face against the car car window, making the taxi driver question his own bad luck. Ken watches the car leave in a somewhat chaotic manner. Then the protagonist says out loud that he's been feeling a strange premonition for a while now. With a glance behind him, he asks the people standing there who they are. The stalker appears and says Ken doesn't need to worry. They're not suspicious people. Then the man shows his business card. His name is Kisakita, and he claims to be from a private investigation agency. Our guy looks skeptically at the card while the supposed detective starts talking about a case involving assaulted students. Kisakita, who just claimed not to be suspicious, asks for cooperation in the shadiest way possible. Ken takes the card and says the situation is unfortunate. With a smile even more suspicious than the detectives themselves, the protagonist says that of course he'll cooperate. Near a park, we overhear a conversation. Kaisuk talks about how terrible the crime is. The students claim they were attacked out of nowhere by some guy. Walking calmly beside the detective, the young man asks if maybe the students did something to deserve getting beaten. The detective stops walking when Ken continues, saying that not only did they deserve it, but they also paid lackeys to act like victims. Kaisuk says that in this case, there's good news and bad news. He asks the young man if he knows what they are. Without waiting for an answer, the man continues. The good news is that his client asked him not to kill the assailant. As the henchmen surround the young man, he still doesn't reveal what the bad news is. Out of nowhere, he draws and cocks a revolver. Pointing it at the protagonist, he says the bad news is that the young man's chatter has annoyed him. Ken doesn't flinch and says he has only one question. Kaisuk tells him to go ahead and ask. The young man glances briefly around, then asks the armed man if by any chance he has already told his client that he captured him. When one of the men says he hasn't told the client yet because he won't say anything until Ken is dead, the young man smiles in satisfaction. With eyes glowing, the protagonist confesses that this way is much more convenient. Kaisuk instantly realizes he made a mistake. The detective starts firing desperately in the young man's direction. Ken dodges the bullets as if they're moving in slow motion while steadily approaching Kaisuk. In an instant, our hero, glowing with a golden aura, is face to face with the armed man. The detective curses under his breath and steps back slightly. He immediately tries to land a blow, but the young man dodges it with ease. Ken grabs the man by the collar and throws him far through the air like a paper airplane. The goons are shaken at the sight of their boss lying twisted on the ground. Then they decide to fight back, each armed with a weapon. The thugs attack the young man in pairs, while the protagonist, eyes glowing, simply waits. Ken dodges while simultaneously grabbing the arm of the opponent holding a knife. The young man drives his knee straight into the guy's family jewels. The poor thug nearly passes out and starts babbling nonsense. He drops the knife, clearly blacking out. Ken catches it before it hits the ground and, with a quick motion, prepares to throw. The blade grazes the face of henchman number 2. The guy definitely soils himself. Wisely, henchman number 2 decides to give up before even trying. With all opponents down, the young man announces that he also has good and bad news for Kaisuk. The protagonist crouches to pick up the gun, saying the good news is that he wasn't planning to kill him. He cocks the gun and reveals the bad news. Smiling maliciously, he says that he still won't kill him. Ken asks what the guy plans to do now and begins a countdown. 1. The henchman unconscious on the ground. 2. The one completely in shock. 3. Kisukita himself. And then the only thing the 3 mercenaries could see was the black barrel of a gun. Moments later, the young man is still interrogating the thugs. In a threatening tone, Ken warns the henchmen that if they're trying to stall, it's a pointless effort. The young man turns to henchman number 2 and confirms whether his name is Oris. Without waiting for an answer, Ken points at Oris and asks if maybe he can't hear because his ear is clogged. The young man's dark lair sends an unspoken message. Realizing what's about to happen, the henchman panics and begs the protagonist to wait a moment. With his finger already on the trigger, the young man ignores the man's pleas and fires. In the dimly lit park, only the man's screams can be heard. Henchman Oris is now missing an ear. Kaisuk watches his lackey freak out while babbling nonsense. Nervously, the fake private detective starts talking. Still on the ground, the man tells the young guy that he'll never show his face in front of him again. As part of his bargaining, Kaisuk says he'll give all the money he was offered and even add more, but the young man cuts him off, saying it's not about the money. Ken extends his hand and asks for the criminal's phone, saying what he really needs is the contact information of the person who hired him. The thug panics and begs the young man to ask for anything else but that. Kaisuk offers to double the payment, but our hero doesn't care about money and tells the man he doesn't understand his situation. With eyes full of fear, the detective asks Ken if by any chance he knows who his client is. The young man simply moves toward the criminal with light steps. The protagonist stops in front of the man with an air of superiority and says he knows his client is the 7 Stars Society. Kaisuk is stunned that the young man knows this and asks how he found out. In a desperate attempt, the henchman says the Seven Stars Society isn't an enemy he can face alone. Being their enemy means being an enemy of the state. The organization controls not only the media but also politics. On top of that, they have infinite wealth at their disposal. Even the country's president is nothing more than a pawn of the Seven Stars. No one can go head-to-head with the Seven, especially Executive Hugo Mizukami. While searching for something in his jacket, Kaisuke tells the protagonist that not only will he never get revenge, but he'll have to flee the country. He extends his phone to the young man with a trembling hand, saying he'll introduce him to a face change specialist. Our hero couldn't care less. He scratches his ear and yawns while listening to the speech. Ken crouches next to the desperate man and says he even appreciates the advice, but he's not offering a deal or a negotiation. The young man explains simply that Kaisuke's only option is to hand over the phone. The cold metal of the gun touches Kaisuke's face. The protagonist asks if maybe he's got a clogged ear too. Moving the barrel along the enemy's face, Ken says that to him it seems like all the henchmen have hearing problems. Quickly changing targets, the young man shows a sinister smile and asks if maybe the man's problem is with his eyes. With a revolver pressed against his own forehead, the criminal asks the young man what he plans to do. In response, the protagonist's smile turns even more twisted as he wonders if he needs to spell everything out for the guy on the floor. The three criminals sprint through the alleyways of the city without stopping to breathe or rest. The group's leader glances behind to see if they're being followed. Upon confirming no one is chasing them, they begin to slow down, until finally they stop running. The three men finally pause to rest and catch their breath. Kaisuke can't stop thinking about how the young man stole all that information. Interrupting the leader's thoughts, one of his men suggests they simply tell the client the truth about what happened. His superior asks the fool if he has a death wish. The henchman who got sick and passed out says that even if they go back, they have nothing to show for it. Kaisuke tells the other two that the area they're in is full of detective agencies, so ambushes and conflicts of interest are common. The criminals search around the city. They find an agency called the Detective Union. The leader tells Oris that his missing ear will serve as proof. The other henchman asks the boss if the guys at the Detective Union will back up their story, and Kaisuke says of course not. Confused, the criminal asks how they're going to make the story believable then. The detective simply replies that they'll have to take them all out. Survival of the fittest, and that's that. The weak are oppressed and only the strong have rights in this world. Meanwhile, Ken searches through the phone he stole from Kaisuke. Tokyo wakes up to another beautiful day. The sun shines and birds sing. Inside a hospital room, two people meet. The doctor asks the young man if he has any chronic illness because he moves well for someone with a body in that condition. The young man replies that he had health problems during high school and asks if his condition is really that bad. Surprised, the doctor says that judging by his body, he would guess the young man is around 60 to 70 years old. Ken says he's used to hearing that he looks like an old man and asks the doctor if he's able to fight, receiving a negative answer. The healthcare professional tells the young man that if he punches someone, what's going to break isn't the enemy's face, it's his own hand. The doctor goes on to say that he has a problem in his left lung and there's a chance he has chronic obstructive respiratory disease. Sitting down, the young man thinks about how his transformation, in which all his cells are being replaced, is in its final stage, making him look sick. Ken specifically chose a hospital under the control of the Seven Stars so they would believe he's weak. Our guy is satisfied with having set the perfect trap. Now he just has to wait. In the criminal underworld, a man with a yellow tie is carrying out a task. In his right hand, he holds a paper envelope. He reaches his destination and opens the door, letting light flood into the room. The man grabs the attention of the people inside the dark room. Two seated individuals hear him say it's almost time for the meeting and ask where the others are. The red-eyed woman replies that Yugo went to deal with the problem. Saki's trauma has made her too anxious, so she won't be coming, and Kazuki went to update Kei with the latest information. The woman scoffs and says the situation feels like a school group project. A guy sitting beside her says it's too much drama over just one delinquent. The man with the yellow tie places the paper envelope on the table and says he has something to discuss regarding Ken Yanagimono. The two figures at the table look at the document and the standing man continues, saying Ken had a routine checkup today and the result is what they're looking at. The redhead asks what this is, since the boy isn't a critical patient. The man sitting next to her says he obviously got hurt on the battlefield and in the bus accident, and the guy with the yellow tie says that's exactly the point and that this is the perfect time to strike. It was also confirmed that the boy has enrolled to return to university. The redhead adds that if he wants to work on group projects, the university is one where the Seven Star Society has strong connections. She then thinks of some people she knows in that place. We live in a dangerous world. A single fight on campus could easily end in someone's death. The woman laughs, clearly thrilled by the idea. Then the redhead comes up with another thought and wonders aloud, what if he was actually an agent from some shady organization? information. He's only joking, of course. The suspicious figures pass the document back across the table. At Sushi Ayano Koji, the secretary of the security committee declares that he will handle the matter personally. This will be difficult to cover up, so I'll make sure to tell the full truth, says Kamito Minajo, owner of the country's largest telecommunications company. However, this plan will only work if he's already dead. Even the 7 Stars connections at the university won't be enough to finish him off. Kenzaki Tomo, daughter of a congressman and chief secretary to the prime minister, offers to enroll several ability users at the university. On a night lit by a full moon, distant music drifts through the air. The sound of a ringing phone breaks the silence. Its owner reaches out to answer it. The young man picks up a call from Hermes. The violet-haired youth sounds cheerful on the other end of the line. Hermes says it's an honor to speak on the phone with a celebrated public hero, but Ken cuts him off and tells him to stop stalling and get to the point about May's case. The informant pretends to be offended, complaining that Ken is too cold. He doesn't have any information on May's case yet, but he does have something interesting for the young man. Hermes mentions a contact saved in the protagonist's phone. He sends over the location of Aki Kuniyama, who should have some useful clues. Our protagonist asks worriedly if Aki is in danger. The young man on the other end replies that she's still in the country, but in a place that's even harder to reach than if she had gone abroad. Speaking in riddles, the informant says she's close by yet difficult to find, though perhaps Ken can manage it with ease. Oreo the headache, the protagonist asks him to just say it plainly. Hermes then says, putting it simply, that she was captured by the 7 Star Society. The revelation leaves the young man stunned. Ken falls silent for a moment as he tries to process what he just heard. It feels as if the ground has crumbled beneath his feet, dropping him into an empty void. The protagonist suddenly takes off running, abandoning the phone behind him while the call is still connected. Hermes mutters to himself that the boy should keep running until he collapses from exhaustion. Ken is furious after this discovery. Our hero races like a madman through the streets of Tokyo, says Aki. Artificial lights illuminate the night. On a phone call, a group of detectives report that they've lost track of a certain delinquent. A man drops his drink and listens intently to the phone. Yugo asks the detective what he means by needing more henchmen. He is already short-staffed as it is. As an example, the executive mentions that he wants to hire the bodyguards of the person on the other end of the line. And if that person were to die in an accident, they wouldn't need bodyguards anymore. Before Congressman Maida can respond, Yugo abruptly hangs up on him. The big man glares at the phone. Furious, he despises people who don't know their place. Every time Yugo remembers the little brat who slipped through his fingers, a chill runs down his spine. And to make matters worse, the guy they thought was dead has suddenly reappeared out of nowhere. The executive paces restlessly around the room. Yugo snatches a bottle of whiskey and continues ranting about how obstacles keep piling up in his path. He hurls the entire drink onto the seated woman, snarling that even the people who are supposed to fix problems are completely useless. With a dead, hollow look in his eyes, the executive tells her he ought to cut her tongue out. The woman trembles in terror, head bowed low. A messenger enters, apologizing for the interruption, and informs Yugo that the 7 Star Society needs to speak with him urgently. Yugo replies that he'll be right there. He then orders one of his men to keep watch over the woman and relocate her somewhere else. 2 men in black suits roughly shove the woman into a waiting car. A third man, cigarette dangling from his lips, mutters that if she had just done her job as bait, none of this would have happened. A young man suddenly interrupts the scene, demanding to know what they're doing. The girl in red immediately recognizes the protagonist. The man with the cigarette snaps, asking who the hell this guy is. 571 to 573. Ken pauses for a moment, thinking before answering that he's just a delinquent passing through. The same excuse as always. The thug bursts out laughing right in his face. He mocks Ken, asking if he's drunk or just stupid. As the goon moves to shoo him away, Ken's hand is already shooting forward. The 2 men holding the woman only feel a sharp gust of wind brush the backs of their necks as something streaks past them. The cigarette-smoking thug is sent flying through the air. As the dust settles, the protagonist jokes that the rest of them must be drunk too. Glancing at the unconscious man he just threw, he adds that the criminals must have drunk themselves into a stupor. The young man turns to the other 2 thugs and remarks that they always manage to cause plenty of trouble before finally blacking out. One of the henchmen loses his patience. The man in the suit charges straight at the protagonist. In an instant, he's right in Ken's face. The criminal has no idea that Ken moves like a martial arts master, far sharper than Yasuo, effortlessly dodging every strike. The protagonist catches the man's head like a goalie snatching a ball and slams him hard onto the hood of the car. Seeing his partner go down, the second thug still rushes in, slashing with a kitchen knife. Ken easily sidesteps the attack. Our hero grabs the knife-wielding thug by the hair, spins him around 180 degrees, and smashes his face into the car's hood with brutal force. course. Ken comments dryly that the henchman's drinking habits must be terrible if he's face-planting into such an expensive car like that. The young man yanks the thug up by his hair and asks if he agrees, but the man, now covered in grime, is clearly unconscious and far away. The protagonist tells the knocked-out criminals that in their current drunk state, they're better off staying down. At that moment, the clever girl who had hidden herself emerges from the alley. Ken turns toward the voice, his eyes filled with anticipation. The girl, tears streaming down her face, asks if she's too late. Our hero gently takes her hand. He apologizes, saying everything is his fault. Aki quickly explains that Ken's sister has fled to the neighboring country in the north. The boy is caught completely off guard. She continues, saying she overheard Yugo Mizukimi talking about it during a phone call. Yugo flew into a rage and hurled the phone across the room. The criminal blamed the girl for Mei's escape. He had even believed she was already dead. 603 to 604. Ken remarks that the boy's shouting instantly wiped away any lingering nostalgia. His colleague asks where the protagonist has been all these past 5 years. The young man explains that he went to study abroad and later met some people. His acquaintance then asks whether he's gotten involved in any shady business. The protagonist imagines shady types as people who swindle others out of their money. But in Ken's mind, the image that comes up is a gun and a dangerous man. So he answers that he's definitely not a scammer, though the other person still seems suspicious. Looking around, the protagonist asks who those people are. A group of young people dressed entirely in black comes marching down the hallway. They're from the neighboring country to the north. Ken asks why they're cosplaying as monsters right inside a university. The international situation in Japan has grown complicated. Oil has been replaced by a new energy source called Asapak, a substance capable of triggering awakenings in people with special powers. Ever since Japan developed this substance, a large number of awakened individuals have started to appear. As a result, organizations from around the world have begun taking action. On the surface, it looks like a simple exchange program, but in reality, it's pure espionage. The acquaintance then corrects the protagonist. He tells him that the students from the north really are part of a mafia. Paradise comes from the northern country. Pure Stream is from the eastern country, and the Hand Rang faction is from Japan itself. The students have introduced a rule known as duel, which essentially means that if you're unhappy with someone, you settle it through a fight. Although the university's self-governance committee still technically exists, it has completely lost all credibility. Ken mutters that the whole situation is a complete waste of time. A tall guy with striking green eyes calls out to him and demands that he move out of the way. The protagonist views the provocation as nothing more than entertainment. The big guy stares straight at our hero, waiting for him to step aside. Just before the situation explodes, another guy steps in and interrupts them. The skinny one remarks that the green-eyed guy can't get through because there's a massive balloon of resentment blocking the path. His comment leaves the big guy seething with anger. The tall student raises his fist, ready to punch the skinny guy, and snaps at him, asking if they didn't teach him to keep his mouth shut back in paradise. Still holding the tall guy's arm in the air, the skinny one replies that of course he knows the rules, then adds that in paradise they teach adults not to meddle in children's games. A commanding voice echoes down the hallway, declaring that enough is enough. The owner of the voice, a girl wearing a yellow cloak, approaches the tense scene. She asks pointedly whether Japan's Hand Rang faction is trying to disrupt the delicate balance of the school. The skinny young man immediately recognizes her as Jean Quixia from Paradise. Avoiding the subject, the skinny one points at the protagonist and tells him he should take better care of himself. Ken is utterly confused. He doesn't even know this guy. As Quixia walks past, she comments that in the end, the others will simply stand by and watch while the weak get crushed. The girl looks directly at the boy and tells him he's nothing but trash. Once everyone has walked away, the colleague turns to the protagonist and says that this is simply how things work at the university these days. Barely a minute later, a student comes sprinting over to check if the teacher is alright. The boy stops to catch his breath just as Sumiori Takibara, president of the self-governance committee, arrives and apologizes for being late. The professor reassures him, saying there's no need to worry. Both of them are fine. The student admits he's ashamed to let others see the committee in this state. He explains that this is exactly what his committee has become, a group in name only. Ken is already mentally checked out and barely listening. Even so, the committee leader continues speaking. With a spark in his eyes, he asks advisor Ken Yamajimoto to take care of them. Ken begins to agree, saying he'll do his best, but then realizes he isn't anyone's advisor. The three men stare at each other in awkward silence. One of them asks the young man if Professor Sawayama hadn't explained it to him. The boy replies that the professor had promised to bring in someone amazing as their advisor. This revelation annoys Ken even more than when three guys tried to ambush him earlier. As the professor proudly boasts, the boy demands to know how he dares to trick him like this. The protagonist states that the only way way he'll accept is if there's a guarantee that this committee is truly different from the other factions. He looks the committee president straight in the eyes and asks whether he will stay humble once he gains real power. The boy lowers his head at the question. After a pause, the committee member answers that of course they would change. Ken tells him that in that case, he wants nothing to do with it. The president hadn't finished speaking because he genuinely believed they would change. He declares that once they regain authority, it won't matter what they have to do, even if it means using their advisor as a stepping stone. As the leader of the committee, he is determined to transform this rotten school into something they can all be proud of. At nightfall, the three guys sat together on the grass, sharing drinks. Ken tells Yuri that he's quite charismatic. Flushing slightly from the alcohol, Yuri replies that alcohol tolerance is the most important trait for a leader. The boy asks if he can pose a question to our hero. Then the president asks whether Ken is close to Professor K. The protagonist freezes at the question. Shifting the mood of their casual chat, Ken asks Yuri how he ever came to meet someone as terrifying as K-sensei. A flashback takes us back to a high school student. At his feet, another teen lies sprawled on the ground. The standing student watches the other struggle to breathe, the floor around him stained red. Unharmed, the teen asks the people nearby if they always take pride in bullying the weak. We see that several other students are lying unconscious or groaning on the ground around him. Some of them are completely knocked out. Others are barely managing to get up. The only boy still standing says he feels like garbage having to deal with these arrogant types. Our hero, still young, looks again at the student on the ground. He notices the boy doesn't look well. His right hand wouldn't stop trembling. Ken says he's experiencing symptoms similar to his own. The sensation of body and soul tearing apart. The student is shocked to realize someone understands him. The protagonist then explains that he calls this process metamorphosis. The standing teen kneels beside the one on the ground and says that now that he's seen it, he can't ignore it. Our hero helps the student to his feet and comforts him, saying that while he's going through metamorphosis, he won't let anyone touch him. He also explains that after it's over, he'll be on his own. But Ken's gentle smile makes the statement sound almost like a joke. The student is deeply moved by this act of kindness. Still kneeling, he watches the protagonist walk away. Meanwhile, in a tall building in Tokyo, a man with glasses wonders if this is nostalgia washing over him for the first time, but he quickly concludes that it isn't. This feeling is closer to the thrill of discovering something entirely new. The four-eyed man recalls that the protagonist had also gone through metamorphosis, yet he had seemed completely fine back in high school. The professor quietly asks himself, though it's hard to believe, whether Ken has already reached the next stage. The man continues his silent evaluation. Behind the eccentric figure, the office wall is plastered with articles, notes, and documents, hinting at a clear obsession. Maps and photos of various students are also pinned up across it. The situation has far exceeded the professor's expectations, and he openly admits his growing curiosity. Professor K believes he will soon have a new guinea pig. Sunlight filters through the leaves of the trees. The university courtyard lies empty. The professor now asks Ken if he's immune to hangovers. The boy replies that it's actually the professor who's too weak. The professor confesses that he never expected the protagonist to accept the role of advisor for the committee. He adds that perhaps Ken was looking for a place to stay. Or maybe it's because our hero hates seeing his friends backed into a corner. Either way, the professor admits he's happy with the outcome. The protagonist replies that housing wasn't the reason he accepted the offer. Rather, it was because he could sense genuine honesty in the boy's eyes. Ken recalls how Aki tried to comfort him and tells the professor that he can always tell when someone is lying. The boy confesses that he likes people who remain true to themselves. The professor remarks that people like that are rare in this environment. Their conversation is interrupted as someone approaches. The girl stares at the scene in disbelief. Still mid-sentence, the professor chokes on his water when the woman suddenly shouts Ken's last name. Yana Jimoto. The honest Ava greets our hero warmly, causing Sawayama to swallow the rest of his words. Seeing the young woman's excitement at finding the protagonist, the professor immediately senses that Ken has played him. Interrupting the cheerful exchange between the journalist and the boy, Sawayama grabs Ken and says with clear envy that, in the end, he has already found his place. The protagonist asks the reporter what she's doing at the university. She replies that she came to interview the students. Aoi reveals that she heard rumors about various factions gaining strength on campus. Without realizing it, the journalist is drawing curious glances from people around her. She tells the protagonist that since this is such a prestigious university, she decided to investigate the situation in person. However, no one has agreed to an interview so far, and our hero is impressed that Aoi is still in one piece. The reporter says regretfully that she'll get in trouble with her boss if she returns empty-handed. Ken offers to help her, surprising the young woman. Pointing at Sawayama, the protagonist says that despite appearances, this guy is actually part of the faculty. The professor professor realizes there's no escaping this. The trio begins walking across the university campus. The journalist and the professor chat animatedly while Ken observes from a short distance. Sawayama explains to Aoi that most factions have powerful sponsors, except for one. The Midori faction is the exception. Its members don't cause trouble and have no sponsors. Even without influence, people like this faction for their thoughtfulness and solid reputation. The professor concludes that the credit goes to the faction's leader and advises the reporter not to bother trying any more interviews. Aoi is surprised because she had gotten permission from the university. Sawayama explains that it's not about that, and since she's an outsider, he's going to give her some perspective. The man says that the university is a place where you never know what's going to happen or where it's going to happen. With that, the professor says he's leaving because he has work to do, and Aoi thanks him for the help. Before leaving, the colleague gives Ken a thumbs up, though Ken knows he misunderstood everything. The reporter tells the protagonist the professor seems like a good person, and our hero kind of agrees. The protagonist asks the girl what she plans to do now. Aoi replies that she plans to stay a little longer. Ken tells her there's no problem with walking around, but that she shouldn't leave aside. Blushing hard, the young woman starts dying of embarrassment. Aoi realizes they'll basically be having a date on campus and imagines an impossible scene in them playing tag. Her fantasy is interrupted by a guy who walks up saying he heard there was a journalist on campus and came to check it out. Annoyed, the guy says it turns out to be just some shallow woman kissing up to the student council. Ken steps in and says the reporter is a guest. The guy just gets angrier at the fact that some random stranger was walking around so openly. Our hero notices the suspicious movement. The guy pushes the girl aside right before the punch hits her. Aoi is scared by the chaos and screams. The guy with the ponytail says the university's rules are about to collapse. Staring at the boy and the girl, he says the student council should stay out of it. Our hero doesn't like that talk one bit. The gray-haired youth asks the protagonist if he plans to take on the entire Paradise faction. Ken says there's no reason to resist. Leaning closer to the reporter, the guy sneers that the kid should have been honest from the start instead of pretending to be tough. Our hero cuts him off mid-sentence to set the record straight, explaining that resisting would actually require effort on his part. Aoi watches anxiously as the protagonist stands his ground against the thug. The weirdo demands to know what he means by that. Ken makes a bold declaration on behalf of the entire student council. From this moment on, the council officially stands against the Paradise faction. The protagonist finishes the taunt by saying that if they don't like it, they can always fight. Our hero mocks his opponent with a confident smirk. Inside the university, Aoi walks calmly through the halls. Her attention is fixed on her notepad. On the paper are the notes she made about Ken Yanagimoto. The young woman wonders whether her initial conclusion that the boy seems trustworthy is actually correct. In the end, Aoi still can't decide and chooses to simply observe for now. A kid suddenly comes running in with some juicy gossip. The student council president turns his full attention to the news. However, the ground seems to drop out from under him when he learns that the new council advisor has just declared war on Paradise. The boy is stunned and stammers, "Wait, what?" Meanwhile, a crowd that loves a good fight has already gathered around to watch the upcoming brawl. Aoi observes from a safe distance to avoid accidentally catching a stray flying kick. The guy with the ponytail yanks out a massive wooden plank bigger than himself, pointing the improvised weapon at our protagonist. He asks what the hero wants if he wins. Ken replies that if he wins, he wants the Paradise faction to be disbanded. The gray-haired youth can hardly believe what he's hearing. He warns the boy that even jokes have their limits. The protagonist replies that he isn't joking at all. Thinking about how far the student council has fallen, the weirdo shifts his focus to our hero. The ponytail guy starts to declare what he wants if he wins, but he's quickly interrupted. As Aoi draws closer, the student council president snaps that Ken has only been at the university for a single day. In desperation, Yuri shouts that the protagonist doesn't even understand the rules of the duel. Huxia, who happens to be nearby, tells the council president to stop being so dramatic. After all, if Ken doesn't know the rules, it's the student council's fault for being so uncultured. Yuri is already starting to panic over what's coming. The boy blames himself and frantically searches for a way to reverse the situation. Our hero notices how devastated the president looks. Ken cannot ignore the student's suffering, so the protagonist walks over to the desperate boy. Yuri is surprised as he approaches. Standing in front of him, Ken asks if he wasn't the one who wanted more than anything for things to return to normal. The hero continues, telling the president that he won't get anywhere on his own. Yuri replies that if anyone knows that, it's him. Our hero then lets out a soft laugh. Ken nods approvingly that the boy understood and returns to the fight. The people around ask the committee leader if he's okay. Other committee members try to comfort him, saying it's not his fault and that they should remove the advisor before things spiral out of control. Yuri responds that doing so would make sense. The boys try to convince convince him to back down before the fight even begins. The president explains that if he wants to achieve impossible results, he has to be willing to bet on the impossible. He adds that even so, their advisor is kind of dumb. Yuri looks at the guy with the terrible posture and decides to trust him for once. Meanwhile, the commotion on campus continues to build. Our hero returns to his opponent and casually asks what they were talking about before. The provocation hits its mark and the guy completely loses it. The maniac wielding the wooden plank declares that he wants the same thing. The complete end of the student council. Krixia instantly turns into the guy's fangirl and cheers for him to give Ken a total beatdown. The protagonist's opponent charges forward at insane speed, running, jumping, slipping, and attacking all in one frenzied motion. In the blink of an eye, they're face to face. Everything is happening incredibly fast, and, as always, our hero simply dodges. The guy realizes instantly that he missed. Yuri adjusts midair and lunges at Ken like a witch on a broomstick. Casually evading the barrage of attacks, the hero concludes that the Seven-Star Society isn't sponsoring Paradise, because if they were, the stakes of the bet would surely involve him personally. The protagonist considers that the whole thing might be boring, but even if that's the case, they don't seem interested in interfering with the duel. The protagonist dodges with a smooth moonwalk. The crowd around them seems completely blind to reality. They think our hero is losing simply because he isn't fighting back, when in truth he's practically ready to take a nap. A long-haired guy in the audience appears to be one of the few who realizes how one-sided the fight truly is. Meanwhile, the stick-wielding maniac is furious. He begs the protagonist to stop moving so he can actually land a hit. Ken finally remembers the guy is even there. Our hero punches the gray-haired youth square in the face. The guy drops from the very first hit. The protagonist swiftly steals the guy's staff. As the thug tries to use the stick to draw something on the ground, the crowd reacts in disbelief at what just happened. Some even wonder if it was nothing more than pure luck. Our hero attempts to draw a circle but ends up sketching something that looks more like a bean. While Ken evaluates his questionable artwork, a big brute tries to ambush him from behind, and, of course, he dodges it effortlessly. The protagonist grabs his opponent by the collar. Using the staff for leverage, our hero throws the much larger man over his shoulder. The guy lands headfirst and slides across the ground. Ken reminds everyone of Kuxia's earlier words, that he should give his opponents a complete beatdown. The big guy starts trembling uncontrollably as he realizes the dire situation he's in. Just as he opens his mouth to scream for help, he takes a devastating stomp to the face. His agonized cry echoes far across the campus. The protagonist makes juice spray from his opponent's body with the impact. The long-haired guy watches the scene calmly, but the rest of the crowd looks horrified. Yuri observes everything with conflicted emotions. Covered in red juice, Ken makes it clear that he's simply following orders. Our hero asks if that's enough of a beating for one guy. The poor dude had already passed out long ago. The protagonist starts looking for Kuxia. The girl is stunned by the boy's sheer audacity, who goes back to drawing on the ground. It's now clear he's sketching a countdown starting from 0. Our hero nearly messed up the number, and redoing it would have been a real pain. Ken turns and points toward the crowd. The boy begins counting the heads in front of him. Growing tired of counting, the protagonist turns to Yuri and asks him a question. The president snaps back to reality and asks what he wants. Our hero gets straight to the point and asks whether multiple people can participate in a single duel. As an example, Ken inquires if a 1 versus everyone duel would be allowed. The committee leader replies that it's not a problem. As long as he chooses a number of opponents and they all agree, there's no limit. Waving his juice-covered hand, Ken Yanagimoto declares that he's way too lazy to count them one by one. The hero turns back to the spectators and tells them to come and fight. Naturally, the guys watching get fired up. They charge at the boy with fire in their eyes. Attackers swarm the protagonist from every direction. Ken taunts the members of the Paradise faction and invites them to all attack at once. Everyone is stunned by his boldness, and within a second, they're sprinting straight toward him. They gang up to teach the cocky guy a lesson. The first attacker comes flying in with a kick. Ken lets the skinny guy come at him full force, but the guy quickly realizes something is wrong. Our hero grabs the kid's leg midair, just inches from his face, and tells him to respect his senpai. To teach him a lesson, Ken crushes the guy's heel with one hand. As the kid screams in pain, the other students arrive at full speed. The protagonist drops the guy and readies his staff. He knocks 5 teeth out of an attacker dropping from above. The hero spins forward swiftly and delivers a powerful kick to the guy charging at him like a bull. Cowards prepare to ambush our boy from behind. 3 guys grab the protagonist's torso to pin him in place while another staff-wielding maniac drops down from above. The bird boy arrives screaming a war cry. No one can clearly see what happens on impact, only a dark aura rising from the chaos. Several boys go flying as the next wave rushes in. Ken spins his staff with one hand, then whirls like like a buzzing blade, sending everyone around him flying. Our hero tells the ungrateful underclassman that he's a good senpai who just wasted his time playing with them. He pauses briefly to whack a rude guy. As the guy sails through the air, Ken senpai finishes telling his ungrateful kuhais how upset he is. Another attacker flies in with a kick. The protagonist ducks, complaining about the lack of manners, and cracks him on the head with the staff to knock some sense into him. A third staff-wielding maniac parachutes down, and it feels like the Paradise members are endless. The impact of the landing is phenomenal, and maniac member number 3 is left in shock. Ken catches his staff midair like it's nothing. Then the hero snaps the weapon like a twig, causing the guy holding it to collapse. The protagonist drives the pole into the guy's belly, creating a new belly button, and obviously the maniac goes down. Two boys who were debating whether to join the fight watch yet another ally get wrecked. Ken tells them that even if they want their senpai to die, they should at least say it with better manners. The two guys gather their courage and charge at the protagonist. The first one to reach him gets turned into a human pug, while the second has all 4 wisdom teeth knocked out for free. Either way, both of them fly across the campus like rag dolls. Our hero tells the members of Paradise that they're all trash. The remaining onlookers are still trying to process what just happened. Yori is stunned to realize that Ken was every bit as strong as he claimed. The committee leader recalls the night they spent drinking together. They had been sitting in silence when the protagonist suddenly broke it, telling Yori that he was highly recyclable. Not understanding a word, the boy just stared at him blankly. Amon explained to the president that Ken had actually been complimenting him, but that only left the boy even more confused. The professor elaborated that when the protagonist lightly insults someone, it's actually his way of giving praise. The older man asked the boy if he knew what a vagabond was. When Yori said no, Amon prepared to give the student a special lesson. In simple terms, the professor explained that a vagabond is someone who never stays in one place for long. There's no real mutual interest between the vagabond and the people passing by on the street. No matter what kind of help he receives, he's already deeply accustomed to his situation. And so it continues until the end of his life. In the end, it seems he even rejects what he has absorbed, remaining alone, surrounded by enemies. The world gives this person no breaks, yet he keeps all the malice, fear, and looming misfortune inside and turns those experiences into weapons to strike back. Some people try to get close to the vagabond to take advantage of his strength, but even among them, especially the most useless ones, the vagabond treats them like the trash they are and discards them afterward. That is Ken. Amon concludes that our vagabond hero is fundamentally different from other human beings. Back in the present, another kid receives a free nose job, and that was the story of Ken Yanagimoto. The protagonist shakes the last student who jumped on him and tells him to open his eyes. Just because he broke his nose, the guy starts slacking off. Ken isn't having it and shakes him harder. The protagonist demands the student's number. Even all beaten up, the student still has enough strength to curse our hero out. Senpai loses his patience and tells him to just spit it out. It can't be that hard. When the kid hesitates, Ken asks if his ears are clogged and he can't hear. Even without knowing what the protagonist does to people with clogged ears, the boy panics and raises his index finger. The student starts counting slowly. 1, 2. It's as if he thinks the new nose came with free shipping. He keeps going 3, 4, 5. Apparently, Kuxia had blinked and completely missed the fight because she has no idea what just happened. The girl wonders what kind of monster the protagonist truly is and decides to step into the middle of the chaos to confront him directly. But she slips and falls flat on her face. Kuxia asks Yori if this was all part of his plan, bringing in outsiders to solve the situation for him. The president listens to the accusations with his head lowered. The committee leader then explains that Ken is actually a former student, so it doesn't count as bringing in an outsider. The girl feels utterly humiliated, especially now that even the nerd is looking at her with disdain. Kuxia realizes she has lost control of the situation and starts desperately searching for a way to turn it around. Our hero asks whether he has already met the quota needed to end Paradise, but the leader reminds him that she still has one last card up her sleeve. Jean Kuxia calls out to the long-haired guy who has been quietly watching from the corner the entire time. Filled with malice, the girl orders him to draw his sword. Zalong replies that he'll take care of it. Getting into position, the long-haired guy declares that he is at Kuxia's service. Wei Zalong draws his sword, but the long-haired fighter seems genuinely excited to face our hero. Meanwhile, the protagonist is busy using his stick to write on the ground. It's clear the guy has improved his art. Among the countless opponents lying scattered around, the number 182 stands out prominently. Ken realizes there is still one miserable soul left to deal with. The protagonist actually gets annoyed at the thought of having to erase and rewrite the number. Zalong says it would be rude of him not to prepare properly before fighting his senpai. Our hero pretends to buy the lame excuse. Without another word, his opponent draws his sword and charges forward with a wide, sweeping attack. Ken barely shifts and blocks it cleanly with his staff. The long-haired guy realizes instantly that this kid is operating on an entirely different level. Zilong retreats several meters. The long-haired swordsman admits that while the protagonist's presence isn't overwhelmingly intimidating, something about him feels distinctly off. Ken explains that it simply means, compared to him, the swordsman is a nobody. Taunting his enemy, the advisor casually drops his weapon to the ground and declares that he doesn't need it. Zilong accuses our hero of getting cocky just because he beat up a bunch of weaklings. The long-haired guy points his blade at the protagonist and tells him to keep up the arrogance. Closing the distance with long, rapid strides, the opponent eliminates the gap between them. With flashy, extended strikes, the student promises Ken that he'll rip out his tongue. Zilong attacks relentlessly, his wrist steady and precise. It's clear the opponent is highly skilled with the longsword. Ken decides it's time to fight back and advances through the swordsman's blind spot. Before the long-haired fighter can react, it's already too late. The protagonist lands a clean punch on the student. Even though he manages to block with his arms, Zilong still spits blood. The impact sends the swordsman flying backward. Mid-air, the long-haired guy tries to plant his sword into the ground to slow his momentum. Zilong leans on his sword to steady himself while Ken simply watches from a distance, hands tucked casually in his pockets. The swordsman pauses for a moment to reflect and figure out what exactly is going on. At the bottom of the crater, the student is stunned by the hero's overwhelming power. The protagonist asks if the long-haired guy seriously thinks he has time to rest. Zilong gets up slowly like an old woman suffering from arthritis and admits he was wrong. Manifesting his aura, the swordsman confesses that he underestimated the committee advisor. Now he's getting serious. Zilong stares at Ken with glowing red eyes and a completely blank expression. Red sparks fly toward the protagonist. Faster than the eye can follow, the opponent darts into the hero's blind spot. Zilong wields his long sword with masterful skill, thinking to himself that no one can match his speed. He prepares an attack he's certain Ken won't even be able to see coming. With a confident smile, the opponent readies himself for the finishing blow. The long-haired swordsman aims straight at the protagonist's back and tells him to regret it in hell. But Ken sees the attack clearly. The two forces collide with an explosive impact. A group of students leaving class notices the rising cloud of dust. The bald guy asks the person in front of him what just happened. The other replies that it was too fast, he couldn't even see it. Everyone watches intently as the smoke begins to settle, eager to find out what the hell just occurred. Zilong is completely shocked. Our hero's hand had simply stopped the sword. Ken caught the blade with a single finger. The swordsman can't accept that instead of dodging, he chose to grab it directly. It's like he's toying with a child. Our hero turns to him and asks, "Don't tell me that was your best?" The long-haired swordsman tries to yank his weapon back, but the long sword doesn't budge an inch. Ken tells the freshman that he thought he was done playing around and sarcastically apologizes. The protagonist says that, as a responsible upperclassman, he should accept the invitation. In a flash, he teleports behind his opponent. Annoyed, Zilong frantically searches for our hero with his eyes. The swordsman swings at him, but Ken is already 180 degrees behind him again. Zilong pours everything into one final, desperate attack, boosting his speed to the limit. As the opponent strikes, the protagonist taps his wrist and seizes him by the throat. Ken lifts Zilong clean off the ground by the neck. Our hero watches calmly as his opponent struggles for breath. The swordsman realizes this is the end for him. The protagonist glances at the sword still gripped in the long-haired guy's hand. Then Ken decides to borrow it. Zilong's neck begins turning purple. Our hero drops the now unconscious long-haired guy to the ground. The boy looks down at the number he had written on the ground just minutes earlier. With ogre-like strength, Ken drags the sword along the ground. The student's blade snaps under the pressure, but our hero successfully changes the number 2 into a 3. The protagonist looks disappointed in the sword. Of course, it was made in China. Ken tosses the broken sword onto the unconscious student and remarks that his leader should have bought something better. Speaking of which, the boy scans the crowd in search of their leader. Looking directly at Kuxia, the advisor asks if the girl remembers the deal they made. The girl turns to Ken in utter shock. Kuxia looks around and sees that all her allies have been completely defeated. Other students are already laughing and treating her like a joke. Things couldn't possibly look worse for Paradise. The protagonist loses his patience and asks if she still has any more lackeys left to send at him. The antagonist bites her lip in fury and glares at him, unable to respond. Our hero waits patiently for the leader of Paradise to say something. At that moment, all the girl can do is stare at the boy with pure hatred in her eyes. Across the university grounds, people are gossiping non-stop about the shocking events. One student asks another why the strongest member of Paradise, Zilong, got beaten so badly. His friend replies that he was taken down with bare hands. The university students stare at Kokshia's back, waiting to see what she'll do next. However, the girl remains frozen in place as she listens to the whispers around her about the collapse of her empire. The looks directed at the former leader confirm her worst nightmare. Paradise is finished. No matter how hard Kokshia tries to find a way out, it seems impossible. Overwhelmed by despair, she covers her face with both hands. Peeking through her fingers, the girl glares at Ken, blaming him for everything and wishing he had never appeared. Our hero, still covered in red juice, waits patiently for the girl's response. Around him, people are pointing, texting their friends, and even filming the scene. The protagonist is surprised by the heavy silence. He had expected the situation to explode into chaos. The remaining factions are probably already regrouping to finish off what's left of Paradise and rethinking their strategy against the committee. The regular students are too afraid to openly celebrate. One of them timidly approaches and asks if Ken-senpai has a quick moment. From a distance, people watch the two boys talking, completely clueless about what it's about. The protagonist asks the committee leader if he is truly certain he wants to settle things this way. They had already warned him that he was genuinely concerned about burdening Ken with even more responsibility. Our hero agrees and returns to what he was doing before. The boy stops once more in front of Kokshia and tells her he needs to confirm something first. The girl glances nervously at the man who is twice her size. Ken asks the woman on the ground whether she is being sponsored by someone or if this is simply a case of nepotism. The question catches the girl completely off guard. For a moment, she is speechless, but soon Kokshia replies that she has no sponsor and owes her power entirely to her family. The protagonist scratches his head and decides to take her at her word. Then Ken draws a deep breath and shouts to everyone around him that he has changed his mind and will no longer disband Paradise. People are utterly bewildered and begin whispering among themselves. But Ken is not finished. He adds that this is also a warning. The hyenas who come after Paradise members simply because they lost, the fools who mock the student council, and any idiot who dares to harm an ordinary student will have to prepare themselves for a duel against Ken-sensei. Then the crowd finally erupts. It feels like the final of the World Cup. The regular students celebrate their freedom to study in peace. This historic moment at the university is being recorded. Oi watches the scene in awe. Our hero had found a way to restore order without encouraging oppression. Yuri feels deeply grateful. The student council finally has a purpose once again. As happy as the president is to have Yanagimoto on his side, he cannot help but think about the disaster it would have been if he had joined one of the factions. The protagonist's gaze shifts as Koksha, utterly shameless, breaks into a smile and begins thanking him. But Ken immediately cuts her off, declaring that the matter is far from resolved. What had changed were the terms of their agreement. Our hero tells the girl that for everything to be truly settled, she will need to bow and apologize to him directly. Koksha is stunned, fully aware that in her country such a gesture represents the highest form of respect. The upperclassman adds that if she isn't satisfied with that option, they can always settle things through a fight instead. He reminds her that she isn't even as strong as her own henchmen. Koksha asks if that is really all she has to do. The girl promptly drops to her knees and apologizes for her gang's behavior. She lowers her head all the way to the ground, bowing fully at our hero's feet. Ken calmly tells Koksha not to forget that the one who truly saved her was the student council president. Still trembling on the ground, the girl agrees. The boy deepens his voice and asks her in a commanding tone whether she truly understands. Completely humiliated and crying with rage, Koksha thanks Ken for saving her skin. A few moments of peace followed the incident. The advisor is now convinced that Paradise was not the game sponsored by the 7 stars. Ken scans his surroundings, thinking the most suspicious group is the whoring, while Koksha quietly begins sneaking away behind him. The students in red watch the protagonist closely. Our hero starts crafting a plan to lure out the whoring as Koksha continues slipping away in silence. A person with long lavender hair steps forward to protest. Her name is Nanami Ishida, leader of Pure Stream, and she declares she won't simply back down, inviting Senpai to a duel. Ken sees this as an excellent opportunity to gather more information and asks what she wants if she wins. Preparing her sword, Nanami declares that if she loses, Pure Stream will obey the committee. Our hero likes the terms and asks the girl what will happen if she wins. Nanami replies that she simply doesn't care. The swordswoman's true goal is to show the advisor just how powerful Pure Stream really is. Ken and Nanami stand facing each other, ready for the clash. The girl makes the first move, drawing her sword from its sheath. The swordswoman charges forward, her attacks so fast they blur beyond sight. In the blink of an eye, she has already passed the protagonist. 2 strands of Ken's bangs are sliced clean in the process. The advisor is impressed that a country in complete chaos can still produce this level of talent. The woman remains silent and motionless for a moment. Then Nanami changes her mind and decides to surrender after all. Attacking Ken had felt like trying to cut through concrete, effectively ending the fight. Our hero tells her that as a hairdresser, she did a great job. The boy puts on a tired expression and asks if there is anyone else, because he really feels like taking a break. The protagonist was about to say that fighting level 2 powered people is exhausting, but he was interrupted. Something came hurtling in fast from a short distance. A skinny guy charged at full speed to punch our hero but struck the ground instead, forming a mini crater. The skinny guy calmly lifts his fist from the ground. Without even looking at the upperclassman, the freshman tells him he can't rest yet. Another guy approaches from behind the skinny one. The big guy stands beside him. Both are wearing the typical red uniforms of the whoring. A bit further back, Nanami is surprised by the power the whoring had never shown before. The protagonist doesn't waste any words and gets straight to the point, asking if they are with the 7 stars. The big guy is about to slip up, but the skinny one quickly cuts him off. The freshman then tells the protagonist to stop talking nonsense, insisting they are simply representatives of the whoring looking for a duel. Ken taps his forehead with his index finger and tells the wind that it's over. The skinny guy shouts from afar, asking what he's talking about. Ken looks at him and declares that the whoring is finished. At the end of the 1990s, as the 20th century was coming to a close, people with special abilities began to emerge among the population. These individuals with powers could control and channel the energy within their own bodies. By breaking a certain barrier, they managed to surpass human limits. These individuals didn't just gain sharper senses, but also extraordinary physical abilities. At the first stage, the abilities of superhumans were 4 times greater than those of a normal person. At the second stage, this difference jumped to 16 times, though power levels weren't fixed. Depending on the situation, superhumans could have strategic value greater than dozens or even hundreds of ordinary people. However, with the powers came side effects. The bodies of people with special abilities began to deteriorate and wither due to a mysterious phenomenon. Then, anonymous pioneers developed a certain substance. These pioneers claimed that this substance not only prevented the side effects but could also turn ordinary people into superhumans. This became the gateway to the creation and control of individuals with spectral powers. Nations and organizations worked day and night to produce stronger and stronger superhumans, controlling every stage of research. Even with national support, level 2 individuals were extremely hard to create. Even with 100% government backing, it was still difficult to develop a batch of level 2 people. The protagonist doesn't waste any words and gets straight to the point, asking if they are with the 7 stars. The big guy is about to slip up, but the skinny one quickly cuts him off. The freshman then tells the protagonist to stop talking nonsense, insisting they are simply representatives of the whoring looking for a duel. Ken taps his forehead with his index finger and tells the wind that it's over. The skinny guy shouts from afar, asking what he's talking about. Ken looks at him and declares that the whoring is finished. At the end of the 1990s, as the 20th century was coming to a close, people with special abilities began to emerge among the population. These individuals with powers could control and channel the energy within their own bodies. By breaking a certain barrier, they managed to surpass human limits. These individuals didn't just gain sharper senses, but also extraordinary physical abilities. At the first stage, the abilities of superhumans were 4 times greater than those of a normal person. At the second stage, this difference jumped to 16 times, though power levels weren't fixed. Depending on the situation, superhumans could have strategic value greater than dozens or even hundreds of ordinary people. However, with the powers came side effects. The bodies of people with special abilities began to deteriorate and wither due to a mysterious phenomenon. Then, anonymous pioneers developed a certain substance. These pioneers claimed that this substance not only prevented the side effects but could also turn ordinary people into superhumans. This became the gateway to the creation and control of individuals with spectral powers. Nations and organizations worked day and night to produce stronger and stronger superhumans, controlling every stage of research. Even with national support, level 2 individuals were extremely hard to create. Even with 100% government backing, it was still difficult to develop a batch of level 2 people. Creating level 2 superhumans was crucial because they delivered guaranteed results. It represented a level of power humanity had never before achieved, and it was supposed to ensure success. That's what all of us believed. That was the common belief until now. But now it seems all of that was nonsense. That's what everyone watching Ken Yanagimoto was thinking. Our hero had just wiped the floor with 2 level 2 superhumans at the same time. The protagonist held the skinny guy up by the collar as he interrogated him. Yet the answer remained unchanged. They were simply members of the whoring. Ken loses his patience and slams the kid to the ground. The protagonist warns that if he answers, he'll make it quick. A third member of the whoring watches the scene in panic. The student considers launching a surprise attack while Ken is occupied with the other 2. He takes a step forward, but before he can act, the protagonist, still with his back turned, tells him it's fine to attack as long as he's ready for the consequences. The kid freezes on the spot. Our hero turns his head just enough to look directly at him. The stare is so overwhelming that the boy feels it throughout his entire body. The courage the whoring member possessed vanished in an instant. The murderous intent in Ken's eyes nearly made the kid throw up. When the boy in red finally looked up, it felt as though the entire world had narrowed down to that single crushing stare. Slowly, the sky came back into view. The kid started screaming and begging for help as if he had just seen the girl from the ring. After barely pulling himself together, the boy concludes that Ken Yanagimoto is far more dangerous than the 7 stars. The image of the protagonist will haunt him for a long time. The third whoring member then points to the 2 fallen students and says he was only trying to explain that those 2 were from the whoring. The skinny one yells at him from across the field, asking if he is trying to get them all killed. Our hero, with a touch of dark humor, asks the kid if he has any idea what will happen if he doesn't stay quiet. And you can be sure to remind everyone that there's a fiery reporter filming everything that's happening. The skinny one pauses to think it over. The big guy has been lying on the ground for so long, he might as well have turned into a lizard by now. At this point, they only have one option left. Without a moment of hesitation, both of them bolt toward the hills. Ken lets them go because he has something else to deal with now. The protagonist turns to the third red-clad student, the one who never even got to fight. Just to confirm what he already suspects, the upperclassman asks if the kid can even say where the other 2 are from. The boy stays silent. Ken spends a moment staring at the student. With a sigh, the protagonist reflects on how terrified people are of simply uttering the name 7 stars. Our hero places a hand on the boy's shoulder and congratulates him on making a wise decision, because otherwise he would have been made an example for everyone else. The trembling kid on the ground asks who the hell Yanagimoto really is. Ken asks if it wasn't obvious just by looking. He says he's just an upperclassman bullying a freshman. The 2 henchmen hired by the 7 stars to infiltrate the university keep running for their lives. When they reach an alley that seems empty, they stop to catch their breath. The skinny one asks the big guy how Ken could possibly be such a monster. The larger one replies that for now they should just return to that person without naming who it is. Before the skinny one can respond, something touches him. In the blink of an eye, 2 strong arms grab the fugitives, and the owner of those arms wants to know exactly who this certain someone is. Ken asks the infiltrators if they wouldn't like to go home with a smile on their faces. The skinny one, still full of attitude, tells our hero that if he messes with them, his family could be in danger. The protagonist actually laughs at the irony and notes how chatty the skinny guy suddenly is. While the big guy hasn't said anything to Ken, an idea seems to form in our hero's mind. The boy grabs the big guy's head and examines it. Then he says that if he splits their mouths open and combines the information, maybe he'll get a proper answer. The protagonist shoves his hand into the bigger one's mouth. The other guy is no longer so full of attitude and watches the scene in horror as his partner screams. Ken rips out 2 of the guy's wisdom teeth with his fingers. No charge. Our hero holds up a 3rd wisdom tooth and concludes that his idea was actually pretty solid. Now our dentist starts walking toward the next patient. The protagonist turns to the kid who still has all his teeth and asks if he has a better idea. The skinny one raises his hand like, "Whoa, chill man," and yells at him not to come any closer. Back at the university, people were casually chatting about everything that had just unfolded. Some wondered aloud where the student council's representative had gone. A mysterious woman entered with a teasing aura. The beautiful woman with long green hair asked if Yanagimoto was no longer around. Aoi told the woman that Ken had some business to take care of and asked if something had happened. Barokuren replied that she had witnessed Ken's final human actions and wanted to invite him for tea. The reporter didn't quite understand what she meant but admitted she didn't mind and liked tea. The green-haired woman shut her down, saying she knew exactly what he liked. As the woman walked through the university halls, the atmosphere felt completely different. The authority of the student council had been restored, yet Paradise, even though it hadn't been disbanded, was in collapse after its defeat. So many members had left that the faction now existed in name only. Hori was now under direct supervision of the student council, which had greatly diminished its prestige. Most members of Pure Stream remained, but the faction was currently under the command of the student council. Miyahara had covered the entire transition at the university. She was now considered a brilliant reporter, recognized for her numerous achievements. Our hero sits alone on the campus steps. It seems the 7 Stars Society has started to make its move. A boy in a 4-ring uniform crashes to the ground. Nanami fights alone against 5 men in red. The swordswoman is really working up a sweat. One of her opponents charges forward with nunchaku. Nanami defends herself using the sword sheath. Both combatants rely on brute force, each trying to shatter the other's defense. The girl emerges victorious, hurling her opponent far away. Another enemy quickly closes in from her blind spot, but Nanami notices just in time. The young woman uses her sheath to halt the second opponent's charge. Returning to her fighting stance, the swordswoman grips the hilt tightly. Red sparks flash from her eyes as she activates her aura. Nanami begins drawing her blade from the sheath, but a hand on her shoulder stops her completely. Ken gently rebukes the swordswoman, reminding her that he had already told her not to draw her sword on impulse. Nanami apologizes and sheathes the blade. Our hero is closely overseeing the university's return to order. Ken tells the young woman that she would likely rank in the top 5 in her home country. In front of them, 6 guys lie on the ground after their training session. Nanami confesses that in the past, that fact had made her arrogant. The young woman explains that during a calamity, a key person was needed, and she admits she once believed she was that key. The protagonist becomes very interested in this key. The word keeps appearing on his path. Just as Ken was about to ask Nanami more about the key, someone arrives and interrupts them. Our hero looks ahead and senses trouble. Durakurin has finally found Ken and invites him for tea. Seated at a small cafe table, the boy waits as the beautiful young woman serves the tea. The protagonist had been avoiding the girl, and she comments that it has never been this difficult to invite someone for tea. The woman notes that she has realized he's been dodging her. Ken turns his face away, clearly embarrassed. Staring at the brilliant red tea, the boy explains that he is tired of bureaucracy and political drama, then asks what she wants. Durakurin says the only thing she wants is to talk with him. He is the hero who saved the university, but the woman has other reasons as well. The beautiful young woman confesses that every time she sees him, many things come to mind. Flowers blooming in spring, the sound of cicadas announcing summer, the changing colors of autumn leaves, and the kindness of the first winter snow. Being near Ken makes her feel a deep longing even when he is right there. Durakurin says the complex threads of fate tie them together, and she cannot help wanting to be close. The boy is left speechless, but he quickly takes a sip of his tea and asks her to stop saying such random things. Then Ken watches her with a skeptical look. Looking at Durakurin, he reflects on how he feels something similar to what she described, especially the sense of nostalgia, as if returning home to family. The problem is that instead of familiarity, the boy feels an inexplicable strangeness. The girl asks if he liked the tea, and he asks what would happen if he said no. Durakurin replies that if so, she will simply assume he is lying. Ken notes that the young woman seems to know quite a lot about him. She looks at him tenderly and says that who knows, maybe she really does. The girl then adds that perhaps she knows him as well as his own parents do, irritating the boy. The woman begins to leave the table, but before doing so, she tells Ken he is free to come and go from this place as he pleases. The protagonist watches as the young woman takes the cup away. Durakurin explains that the cafe is called Verdi and is run by the Amadori, making it a perfect spot for a private conversation. Ken starts to question how such an obvious location could offer any real privacy, but he stops himself. There is something strange about the cafe. Even with the Amadori leader's popularity, no one even glances in their direction. The girl tells him that a small adjustment has been made to the location. Nothing special. Without a guide, the place is as unknowable as a tree by the roadside. People pass by as if it doesn't exist. Ken concludes that the woman in front of him is definitely not an ordinary human being. In fact, it is hard to say whether she is even human at all. Meanwhile, another situation unfolds in one of the many offices in Tokyo. A powerful man reviewed the documents that had come to his attention. Ruji Itsuka, the director of the National Security Committee, asks if it is true that both Paradise and the Whoring have been defeated. His subordinate confirms it, adding that those groups no longer hold the influence they once did. The official asks which faction is responsible for such a feat, since both groups were backed by powerful organizations. Upon hearing that it was all the work of a single man, Ruji's eyes light up with interest. The executive questions whether the United States might have been involved in the outcome. The screen shows him maps of people with special abilities. That is not the case, the subordinate explains. Even the Americans were caught off guard by the sudden shift in dynamics at the university. Ruji concludes that the only remaining possibility is the emergence of a new awakened superhuman, and he needs to meet him. The man in the suit stands up, determined to find the protagonist. Ruji immediately leaves his office. He orders a car prepared for his immediate departure. A man standing outside the room expresses surprise that the director himself is personally handling a university matter. Ayano Koji says that as a veteran of the National Security Agency, Ruji should not make such rash decisions. The director disagrees, stating that this is precisely the kind of issue someone at his level must resolve personally. The secretary argues that they should value soldiers who follow orders more than uncontrollable strategic weapons. The secretary steps forward toward Ruji. Ayano Koji stands face to face with the director and asks if he is still clinging to a failed project. Ruji warns the secretary to be careful with his words words. Some random guy tries to ease the tension. The director immediately grabs the man by the neck. Ruji lifts him off the ground and tells his subordinates that the Awakened are far more than mere weapons. They can become one-man armies. He throws the guy aside and explains that another key difference between the Awakened and weapons is that you can actually talk to the Awakened. Ayano Koji asks what happens if they act like weapons that cannot communicate. The director simply replies that no matter how monstrous their strength may be, deep down they are still human. Ruji says he believes things can be resolved with sincerity, as he calls the protagonist. On the other end of the line, Ken answers the executive's call. The boy tells Rokurin that he needs to use the place immediately. The beautiful girl says she will take a stroll since it looks like trouble is on the way. The protagonist explains that because the person on the other end was very persistent, he decided to meet him once and for all. Rokurin reassures the young man, saying that if he treats problems as part of fate, they might start to hold meaning. Then the girl walks away with a lovely smile and tells Ken that hardships are part of every hero's path. The protagonist guides the director to the Verdi Cafe. Ruji observes the place with clear interest. The boy pulls out a chair and says he wants to get straight to the point. The executive feels the full weight of Ken's killing intent, likening the sensation to being tightly chained. Our hero exerts more pressure than most superhumans ever could. Still, the man clenches his fists with firm conviction. There is a vast difference between what can be done and what must be done. Ruji summons all his strength in an effort to withstand the protagonist's overwhelming presence. Ken then smiles at the director. The boy tells the official that he is not suited for politics, since he cannot lie or flatter. The man admits that his actions often cause trouble for his superiors. Our hero walks past the imposing figure and says he will accept the deal because he liked the man's attitude. Trying to compose himself, the man says he understands. Ruji extends his hand to Ken and tells him to reach out if he needs anything. The boy immediately shakes his hand and states that he needs to know the whereabouts of Mei Yanagimoto and Kyoko Kuniyama. The protagonist informs his new partner that Kyoko is likely hospitalized somewhere. Ken searches through his phone for a list of locations, then passes on the information he had stolen from the detective. The man says he will contact him as soon as he finds her and begins to leave. Before departing, Ruji reminds the protagonist that they will be seeing each other often from now on. Ken agrees and sees him off. With no time to rest, the boy's phone starts ringing. The screen shows it is the reporter calling. Ken answers the call, and Aoi complains about his problematic habit of picking up the phone. The protagonist asks what she wants out of nowhere, and the woman replies that she simply wanted to thank him. Because of him, she had won an award. The journalist admits that formalities can be boring and asks if the boy is available. The young man says he has just finished dealing with his problems and tells her to wait in front of her house because he is on his way. A little too happy with the answer, the girl smiles from ear to ear and agrees. In an office, Ayano Koji apologizes to Kei and presents his new plan to his superior. The professor says all the secretary is doing is adding more victims to the equation and admits he didn't have any expectations anyway. The secretary protests, insisting this time will be different. If they manage to weaken him, it will be easy to defeat him. Skeptical, Kei asks whether weakening him is even possible. The professor adds that once again he had only sent a pair of level 2 superhumans after the protagonist, but the secretary smiles. Ayano Koji steps closer to his superior and simply mentions two names, Snowcat and Scavenger. The secretary explains that these are two mercenaries who fought against the protagonist while he was still in the United States. Both are used to fighting Ken and are true professionals at this kind of work. One of the mercenaries calls it a simple revenge match, but it seems like a waste to retreat after poking the hornet's nest. The woman in the cap asks the guy if it wouldn't be more fun to settle the score once and for all. However, the man with the scar on his face seems interested only in completing the mission. He asks whether the residents have been evacuated. The cap-wearing mercenary protests and asks the man if he doesn't want to take out the Yasha. In fact, there is a saying in the East. It says that you can't defeat someone who is having fun with what they do. In the rifle scope, the protagonist appears right in the center. After zooming in, it becomes clear that Ken has already noticed the weapon aimed at him. In the evacuated city, a woman's voice rings out. Aoi Miyahara runs toward the protagonist. The mercenary hesitates briefly upon seeing her. No one else was supposed to be there besides Ken Yanagimoto. The girl in the cap turns to her partner for clarity, and the scarred man explains who she is. After a brief moment of thought, the mercenaries consider the protagonist's possible alliance with the media and decide to eliminate the girl immediately. The maniac in the cap doesn't need to be told twice and already aims her sniper rifle at poor Aoi. As she strokes the trigger, the mercenary says that if the girl wants to blame someone, she should blame the monster standing in front of her. The weapon fires, and the spotter confirms someone has been hit. The bullet and the protagonist fly toward the reporter at the same speed. Aoi watches the scene before her in horror. Our hero hero simply catches the projectile midair with his hand. Ken holds the bullet like it is a 200 note, then drops the crumpled metal to the ground. The boy examines the damage on his hand and concludes that it was no ordinary bullet. It was specially designed to counter superhumans. Panicked, the journalist asks the boy if he is okay. All she had seen was something flying straight toward him. The protagonist tells the girl to stay exactly where she is. He then activates his ability and promises he will be right back. Ken expands his power to locate someone he already knows. His vision cuts through the trees and the distance, following the exact direction the shot had come from. And finally, he spots a certain someone's distinctive cap. The protagonist has found his target. Without wasting a second, the boy channels his energy and moves like a bolt of lightning. Ken leaves a glowing trail as he races toward his opponent. Our hero is not happy about being treated like a janitor, always cleaning up someone else's mess. The boy notices that the cap he had spotted earlier is now close. Ken charges forward with full force to clear out the tree, but our hero quickly realizes something is not quite right. It looks like the protagonist has been played by the mercenaries. Camouflaged in the bushes, the mercenary even mocks our hero. Ken locates her quickly because she simply cannot keep her mouth shut. She still hasn't learned. Once again, she keeps talking instead of pulling the trigger. The crazy woman finally fires and seems to believe she has hit the hero. Smoke drifts from the freshly fired rifle barrel. The talkative mercenary is stunned. The boy had pulled off a last-second Matrix-style dodge, and the bullet only grazed his face. Our hero reveals that it was all calculated to lure the rat out of hiding, then charges forward. A second later, the two enemies stand face to face. Ken decides this is where he will end the unfortunate story. The young man prepares a punch charged with his energy. In the midst of it all, the mercenary begs for mercy. She screams that she gives up, waves the white flag, and even throws in a Yami Kadasai. Luckily for her, the protagonist is curious and diverts his punch into the ground. Completely surrendering, the woman offers to give him a crucial piece of information she holds. After hearing it, Ken can decide whether he still wants to kill her. Our hero tells her to spit it out already. The girl doesn't need to be told twice. Then the mercenary asks Ken if it really looks like she came alone. The boy realizes the hole in his plan and panics. Still positioned on top of the enemy, Ken expands his vision. The protagonist channels his aura toward the place where he had left the reporter. At that moment, Aoi seems fine. She is simply standing there, questioning her life choices. But out of nowhere, the winds of change arrive. A guy grabs her by the collar like a grocery bag and slams the poor girl onto the concrete. The mercenary realizes she wasn't there for work and grabs her by the hair. And the guy even has the audacity to blame her. Confused, Aoi asks what the heck he is talking about since she was just standing there. The mercenary accuses the girl of being a stalker and pulls out his tactical knife. Then the guy slips and reveals that he is really going to kill her out of revenge, and maybe a little jealousy. The young woman decides she needs to buy time. So the journalist remembers something our hero had said while cleaning house at the university. The journalist gathers all her courage and accuses the man in front of her of taking the mission personally, when in fact that wasn't what he was being paid to do. And as it turns out, the girl has a point. The guy gets pissed off and decides to stab her anyway. But then the mercenary realizes he cannot move. An inexplicable pressure spreads throughout his body, leaving him completely paralyzed. Only then does the soldier understand that not everything is worth doing for money. The world around him vanishes, replaced by Yanagimoto's crushing, depressive gaze. The guy bites down on a cherry-flavored gum and regains control of his body using the candy's energy. The mercenary expands his aura to break free from the protagonist's ability, and the poor journalist goes flying through the air like a kite in a matter of milliseconds. Ken praises the girl for buying him time and catches her before she hits the ground. Whatever that guy took, he is a lot stronger now. The opponent charges straight at the boy. The energy of the two superhumans collides, sending lightning crackling in all directions. The protagonist grabs the soldier's armed arm and asks if he has been having trouble sleeping lately. Ken then promises to let the mercenary go today so he can sleep with his mother. The guy flies into a rage at the taunt. Hearing those words, the mercenary is furious. The opponent wants to take out the protagonist right then and there, but he knows his body is not in great shape and the mission to weaken the hero has already been completed. Even though he has been spared, the guy leaves with a promise to Ken that next time will be his end. The protagonist is secretly grateful, knowing that fighting him to the finish would have been a major hassle. Our hero tries to push the reporter away, but she insists it is just a scratch and she is fine. From a distance, the mercenary in the cap watches the two of them like a complete weirdo. In fact, the nutjob is annoyed that Ken somehow managed to get even stronger. The woman laughs at her own luck. If she hadn't surrendered in time, she would be 6 feet under. The protagonist tells the lunatic that he let the guy go, but he quickly warns her not to try anything funny. Surrendering once again, the woman woman assures him that she keeps her word. The mercenary says the mission she was hired for is complete and she never wants to be near the protagonist again because, despite everything, the soldier still dreams of living a long life. As a farewell courtesy, the weirdo spills a secret. Now Ken knows that his next opponent will be none other than Hugo Mizukami. The crazy woman says that if anything happens, they can call Big Sis, referring to herself. Then the mercenary offers the reporter a discount coupon for the inconvenience of almost sending her to the afterlife. Aoi asks if she has no shame offering something like that after nearly turning her into a memorial photo. The woman observes that the girl isn't like them, and the girl asks what she means by that. Then the mercenary explains that some people are so close to their own end that they start adapting to anything. The lunatic even adds that Aoi is always one of the good ones, and, like someone leaving a party, the woman says her goodbyes and hopes never to see the pair again. Aoi asks what that woman's deal is while staring at the discount coupon. The girl hears Ken softly call her name and answers right away. While the reporter worries about the boy's condition, he tries to tell her that the two of them cannot meet anymore. Aoi is in shock. Not only had she almost died, but now she is being rejected too. The journalist asks the protagonist if he believes she is only interested in him because of her job. Before he can even reply, she cries out in anguish that she didn't come looking for him because of work. The girl crumples the coupon in her hand while telling Ken that it is not just about the drama that appears on camera. Aoi speaks about how he stares danger in the face to resolve things, and she confesses that she finds him truly inspiring. Our hero stays silent as the girl begins to speak again, but he cuts her off. Ken assures the journalist that he knows she is not that kind of person. The protagonist explains to Aoi that he is strong and knows he is not in danger no matter the situation. Remembering what happened to the people who mattered to him, the boy confesses to the girl that in the end he always ends up alone. He concludes his speech by saying he does not want to carry that weight anymore. Aoi then asks if the reason he is distancing himself is because he sees her as someone weak. Shaken, the reporter says she understands that she might eventually become a burden. Then Aoi looks the boy straight in the eye and tells him that no matter how strong he is, without support from others he will lose his mind. The young woman grabs the protagonist's hand and confesses that she has seen this scene play out many times in her line of work. Our hero looks visibly upset as he watches the girl desperately try to save their bond. Ken grips his friend's shoulder. The boy lowers his head and starts begging her to go away. The journalist is speechless but seems to understand. Even as she walks away, the girl says she will still find a way to get closer to the hero again someday. And before leaving, Aoi looks into Ken's eyes and asks if she will still be one of the people he will answer to. The protagonist watches her in silence. Tears begin to well up in the boy's eyes. Aoi walks away with a fake smile. Ken watches Aoi's figure slowly disappear into the horizon. Our hero lets out a heavy sigh, trying to collect himself after the painful farewell. But as always, the phone rings the very moment he finds even a second of peace. The caller ID shows the call is coming directly from the university. Ken answers, already half annoyed, and asks what the person on the other end wants. Ruji informs him that he has found the name of the hospital where one of the people the protagonist is searching for had been. But just as the protagonist is about to ask which hospital, he pauses and asks the executive what he means by was. Apparently someone had managed to remove her from the hospital without her family noticing, and now the girl is missing. Ken tells the executive to send reinforcements to his location as soon as he can. Ruji tries to convince the hero that it is too dangerous to act alone, but our hero cuts him off, saying he will do whatever he wants. The official simply accepts that the boy is going to do whatever he feels like. Ken thinks of Aki and how her mother is the only person she has left in her life. Feeling defeated, the protagonist picks up his phone to call someone he never wanted to owe anything to. Elsewhere, Aki is anxiously trying to complete a call, but every attempt goes straight to voicemail. The girl curses her bad luck. Just when she finally got her phone back, she cannot reach him. On the phone screen, the name Kenjo appears. Aki eventually gives up and decides it is better this way. It is better if Ken does not get involved. That is the only way she can save Meg and protect the protagonist. The young woman trembles as she thinks about everything she has had to endure, and after a second of silence, she breaks down, asking what is the point of someone who disappears when she needs them the most. Someone furiously rattles the door of the room she is in. Aki looks ahead in desperation at what is about to happen. The entire door shakes violently from the force applied to the handle. Everything suddenly goes quiet until Yugo loses his patience and kicks the door open. The young woman curls up in fear as the criminal demands that she show herself immediately. Aki Kuniyama drops to the concrete floor. The brute accuses the young woman of not only contacting the protagonist but also leaking information to him. Yugo cowardly grabs the girl by the hair. The executive insults her while she struggles in vain to break free. In desperation, the informant says because the man has no proof and is only speculating. The criminal's empty eyes stare straight into the girl. Yugo decides to move on. While straightening up, the man tells the girl on the floor that she has no idea what he had to do to rebuild the underworld after Ken destroyed it. Yugo confesses that he had to swallow his emotions and accept unnecessary bureaucracy, relying only on his own instincts. Now comfortable, the criminal tells Aki that his judgment is absolute. Suspecting her was never speculation. It was conviction. The young woman finally gets up and asks what comes next. Aki looks Yugo in the eyes and says that if he plans to kill her, then his instincts aren't that good after all. The man gets angry that she still hasn't shut her mouth. Grinding his teeth, Mizukami grows furious, remembering that everything would have been different if he had stolen the Yanagimoto secret. Yugo tells Aki that his real plan is to make sure she never underestimates him again. Panic immediately floods the young woman. The criminal asks if he is speaking to the one in charge of kidnapping her mother and orders them to detach one of Kyoko's hands without letting any blood spill. Those words represented the informant's greatest fear. Aki accuses Yugo of breaking his promise to keep Kyoko alive. The executive lights a cigarette as he acknowledges that was the original deal. In fact, he had told his goons not to let anything spill. The young woman protests, arguing that Mizukami's justification is nothing more than cheap wordplay. Yugo tells Aki that if she keeps whining, he will order the other hand removed as well. The girl falls silent instantly. Aki processes the situation while trembling with fury. Then she decides to kneel. Begging the criminal, Aki asks to take the punishment in her mother's place. Yugo says that for that to happen, the girl has to admit she is a useless piece of trash. As if the humiliation of the words wasn't enough, the executive insists she say them convincingly. Mizukami laughs while Aki begins to stammer, but the young woman manages to repeat the criminal's words even as tears stream down her face. The informant's tears fall one by one onto the floor. Not satisfied, Yugo continues to humiliate the girl. Even as the man approaches, Aki doesn't move. If the girl's mother knew what she was going through, the old lady would have cut her own hand off by now. Mizukami reveals that he is going to be merciful since Aki was obedient. The man signals to a random goon to correct the previous order. Smiling cruelly, the thug says to take only one finger instead of the whole hand as an act of compassion. Meanwhile, on the web, a mysterious young man receives a call from the national hero. Hermes watches as Ken Yanagimoto makes the call, revealing that the informant has access to the city's cameras. The protagonist asks the hacker once again about Aki. This time, the boy wants to know the whereabouts of the girl's mother. Hermes agrees but reminds our hero that he does not accept payment in money. The informant celebrates that Ken is fortunately very strong now and asks what he will get in return. The boy simply tells Hermes that he will receive a reward equal to the job. The hacker asks the protagonist to promise and warns him not to even think about tricking him. Ken asks if he has ever left the informant hanging. Hermes says no and promises never to disappoint someone like him. With the deal sealed, a notification containing the requested information arrives immediately. Ken notices that the woman is not too far from where he is now. So our hero decides that today is the day the 7 stars become 6. Late afternoon sun shines over the slums. 2 armed thugs guard the gate of a warehouse. Inside, a man crouches near a woman's hand with well-manicured nails. Apparently busy, the butcher is interrupted by a faint cry for help. Annoyed, the frightening figure stops what he is doing and complains that the noise is a real pain. Behind the criminal, a very unwell woman is being watched by a thug as she vomits into a bucket. The butcher tells the goon to shut her up. The poor woman looks at the man in terror as the masked thug simply raises his blade. The one in charge is literally half bald. He tells the other thug to turn the lady into mincemeat once he is finished with her. The butcher then notices something interesting on the floor. A gold ring glimmers on the woman's lifeless hand. The guy pries the ring off her finger and feels satisfied. But once again, someone starts making a fuss inside his slaughterhouse. A new goon arrives with an elderly woman tied to a chair, still dressed in hospital clothes. The half-bald man recognizes Kyoko Kuniyama's mother and asks the tied-up woman if she got tired of waiting. Looking downright demonic, the thug says he will finish her off quickly. The woman trembles to her core. The butcher grabs Kyoko by the hair and shows her how lucky she is not to have ended up like the others. That is when the old lady loses it again. The half-bald guy asks his colleagues where he should start cutting her arm. The man who brought her in answers that it is just the pinky this time. The butcher is disappointed with the order and tells the woman that it was probably her daughter who saved her. Kyoko sees her reflection in the criminal's blade as he casually comments that losing a finger is not the end of the world. The psycho raises the cleaver high above his head like he is about to slice a steak and tells the woman to hold still or he will miss. The guy gets ready to chop the lady's pinky off. The man politely asks her to stay very still. Meanwhile, someone is slicing into a juicy steak. The man savors the meat as he wipes his mouth with a napkin. He casually mentions that Yugo will take care of Yanagimoto. His subordinate replies that Yugo has already found a way to deal with the hero. Ayano Koji agrees that the guy is good at what he does, but that does not change the fact that he is a troublemaker. The man in the suit asks if this Yanagimoto is really that dangerous. The secretary's hand even begins to shake. At the moment, the Seven Stars Society rests on a solid foundation under Kei's leadership. But in the past, the organization had been left in ruins, and the reason was a single man. One by one, the group's enforcers had been defeated. Ayano Koji remembers the hand that grabbed him by the neck, the same hand that obliterated the rest of the crew. Our hero was still a teenager at the time. He had crushed the Mizukami family jewels, but he did not know what to do about a guy like Ayano Koji. The boy looks out the window and gets an idea. It looks like they are on the 4th or 5th floor, so the protagonist wonders how many times a star can fall from there before it finally breaks. The mere memory of Ken's face is already a nightmare. Ayano Koji confesses that even the devil would have been kinder. Dropping his utensils on the table, the secretary says he has lost his appetite. He stands up and instructs his underling to send someone to watch the mess from a safe distance. On the plate, the food remains almost untouched, and the 5-pronged fork lies dirty. Atsushi adds to the order, telling them to warn the guy that if he gets too close, he is done. For back at the slaughterhouse, the walls are filthy. The half-bald man looks at the hand that had held the cleaver moments ago and realizes that 4 fingers have gone for a walk. After a slight delay, the butcher lets out a scream, and everyone turns toward the entrance. The guy who threw the knife simply stands there as if it were part of his daily routine. Curled up in a fetal position, the commander yells at the henchman to do something already. The thugs arm themselves and block the young man's path. Ken only has eyes for the woman tied to the chair. One of the henchmen charges at the protagonist. The young man dodges effortlessly. He then grabs the armed man's wrist, forcing him to drop the kitchen knife. Yanagimoto picks up the blade the enemy dropped and drives it between his ribs, causing ketchup to gush out. The other henchmen realize things have gone south for them. Then the protagonist paints the place red and looks at the rest of the gang with very few thoughts. The first lunatic to attack simply drops to the ground, gets sick, and then kicks the bucket. The half-bald guy screams in outrage, asking why the hell the henchmen are using blades when they have guns. The thugs quickly change strategy and draw their pistols. A wanted mafioso is the first to take aim at the protagonist, but Yanagimoto is no longer there. The underling is about to ask where the guy went when he is cut off by a surprise attack. Just like him, the other two are taken out before they can even react. In an instant, Ken is already standing face to face with the butcher. The half-bald man stares in utter disbelief. The young man is already right in front of him while his henchmen have yet to hit the ground. With a quick, shameless smile, the guy asks if he can leave. Our hero doesn't utter a single word in response to such audacity. Doubling down, the guy yells to be released and calls Ken a monster. He takes a perfectly placed punch that practically collapses his face. Now looking like Voldemort, the half-bald man is sent flying through the air. The butcher, now missing about 5 teeth, pleads to the wind for help. Our hero tells him he is asking for too much now and stomps on him like a cockroach, bursting him open like a red paint balloon. Meanwhile, the old lady keeps her eyes tightly shut, praying the Our Father. She follows the classic logic that if she cannot see it, it does not exist, but she eventually gathers the courage to peek out from the corner of her eye. Ken smiles at her with guilt in his eyes and apologizes for being late. Elsewhere, Mizukami smokes his cigarette. The executive takes pleasure in his subordinate's despair. Aki still finds the courage to insult him, but the man clearly enjoys the challenge. Yugo flicks the cigarette at the pretty young woman's head and says even an ashtray is better than trash like her. The brute warns her that whether he takes another finger depends entirely on his mood. When the phone rings, the executive tells the young woman that the minor surgery should be over by now. Yugo answers the call, asking the guy on the line if he cut properly, but he is surprised by another familiar voice. Ken tells the longtime acquaintance that it has been a while. Our hero asks the brute if he has been enjoying his pathetic little life, but he knows it couldn't have been easy after he turned the mobster into a eunuch. Regretting that he hadn't finished Mizukami off back then, Ken takes the opportunity to tell him that he has already dealt with everyone at the warehouse, which shouldn't be a problem since Yugo never cared about anyone anyway. Before hanging up, the hero tells his enemy to stay alive and well until he arrives, because when he gets there, he is going to tear the Yakuza in half with his bare hands. Without having said a single word during the call, Yugo crushes the smartphone. The executive throws the device away, nearly hitting the girl. The brute stands up and tells a nearby henchman to call the guys at the factory, because they are going to war with everything they have prepared for the occasion. Yugo turns to another henchman and orders him to get the gas masks ready too, because they are heading to the factory. The guy hesitates, wondering if gas masks will be enough. The mafioso asks if he has a problem with that.